across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Glory. It's 2 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham and we are up and at 'em. It's Friday. We managed to get to the end of yet another week. We're almost at the end of another month, actually. We're about to enter February extraordinarily. I woke up, looked out the window and saw it was raining pretty hard, which is never a good sign. So if you're out and about this morning, there may well be. I think there's a third storm we've had this week, so it might not be very nice weather over the weekend. But we've got a lot to talk about this morning. I'm joined by Bob Seeley, former Conservative MP. Bob, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Nice to see you. We've got many stories to talk about. The big story from yesterday, really, though, after that tragic accident in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump, the president, gave his first presidential press conference inside the White House media briefing room, where he hasn't been until this moment since he was elected, literally just over 10 days ago. I mean, it's incredible, really. It feels like he's been there for about 2 years. But he made this extraordinary series of statements about DEI, which is diversity, equity and inclusion policy, which for him has basically ruined federal recruitment policies. And he's basically said that the policies of hiring people for diversity purposes rather than for talent purposes pretty much caused the crash. Have a listen to this.
The FAA's website states,
Crash.
Include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway.
I mean, obviously it's a very serious story. It's a very serious, terrible accident that's happened. But what he's done is he's shone a light, as ever, Donald Trump, on something that I think a lot of us have suspected for a very long time, that there's a lot of people running things in all parts of the world, including in our own country, well qualified to do it. 0344 499 1000. Meanwhile, we've got a couple of other stories to talk to you about. The Attorney General's in trouble again. Apparently he's being accused of being an activist and basically obstructing government policy, which is a terrible thing to do. We've also got the Daily Telegraph on the front page saying that a tenth of farmland is going to be axed for net zero. Ed Miliband, who we had on the missing list yesterday, has popped up again, and apparently he went into cabinet on Tuesday and said, we don't need a third runway at Heathrow, don't do it, or else I might resign. He hasn't resigned, obviously, because he's still there, unfortunately. Also, finally, we're going to try and reach him today. The Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey. He's apparently been slapped with a Russian arrest warrant. I know Bob will have something to say about that, knows a thing or two about Russia. This is Morning Glory. Don't forget, you can get in touch with us. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Send us a voice note on WhatsApp. Call us if you wish. Send us a text at 87222. This is Talk. I'm Mike Graham. Let's get it on. So here we are, Friday, 6:05 in the morning. Bob Seeley's here. Very good morning to you, Bob.
Morning, Mike.
I don't know if you managed to see the Trump press conference live yesterday, but it was quite an extraordinary thing, wasn't it? As we were, I was actually in the car listening to it, thinking, this is the kind of thing that people say in the pub, right? Yeah. And I know that there will be those, and there are those who say,
like him.
Yeah, and there will be those who say, you know, it was in bad taste and it was too soon and he shouldn't be doing it. But actually, he makes a very good point, doesn't he?
He does. I have to say that is the most orange I've ever seen him.
Yes, there's also that, yeah.
On this issue, is there a problem with diversity hires? Absolutely. Is there any evidence that diversity hire causes crash? No. There is evidence that not enough people may have been in the job at the time.
Yes.
So there's a staff shortage issue for sure. And you know, the New York Times and other mainstream US media have been talking about this quite a bit.
Yeah.
So
and he may know more than we know at this point as well. So I mean, it could well be. I mean, he certainly referred to a piece of legislation that the Biden administration brought in January the 14th, which allowed for people to be hired who had neurological difficulties, disabilities, mental problems.
And he read the list and it ended with dwarfism. Yeah, absolutely. But there is no evidence. I have to say, there is from everything I've seen in the papers, there's no evidence that actually that is the case here.
Right.
There is a problem with diversity hires because people are getting hired for the wrong reasons, for sure. And that's why his this call for a colourblind meritocratic society, I think it echoes absolutely in America and absolutely here as well.
It does, because there's no question, is there, that we know for a fact that there are government departments, you'll know better than me, government departments which have hiring policies which are not based on meritocracy, which are not based on anything other than quotas, on, you know, ticking boxes and go, well, we better get a few of those people in, some of these people over here. For sure. And it needs to stop.
For sure. I mean, I'm not quite sure how this is going to go down, what he said, because if there is truth behind it, for sure. But if there isn't, then I think it's just going to give ammunition to his enemies. There's a broader point here that he's right on. However, there's no evidence that caused the crash.
I mean, the Mirror has done what you would expect the Mirror to do, a big headline called Shameful, and they're quoting from people like, you know, Pete Buttigieg, who he personally singled out.
Well, Trump went for him yesterday and said, this is all your fault, mate. Yeah,
right. He said, you know, he was in charge of the
Mirror
aviation business.
I mean, with respect, the Mirror is just,
The Mirror, I used to work for the Mirror, and I'm very happy to say that they are now a completely disgraceful operation and, you know, useless, quite frankly. You know, there's no point in hiding the truth.
Exactly.
I mean, they are hopeless. But let's hear a few more from yesterday. Former air traffic controller Michael Pearson spoke to Fox News.
This is a preventable disaster. The system has been under attack through the DEI and the FAA bowing to wokeness since 2010, since the Obama administration.
And the thing about what happened, and again, we wait. I mean, because one of the things he did say as well, he said, you know, if this was Keir Starmer, he'd be asking for another inquiry, wouldn't he? Because that's what they do at Labour. They just want to do more inquiries. And 3 years down the road, you don't really find out very much more.
Unless it's on grooming gangs.
Than you knew now. Yeah, well, of course, doesn't like to do those. But at the end of the day, you know, a helicopter should never have been in that space. The plane was 400 feet, it would seem, from the runway, so it was really, really just about to land.
Okay, but this is one of the problems of that airport, which is why they've had accidents there in the past. It's a very tight...
I've been there many times,
a very tight run-in, and you've got a lot of military helicopters flying around as well. That helicopter should not have been on that flight path.
No.
But again, just reading all the papers, I think what might have happened is that the helicopter had eyes on the airplane behind the one that it hit, and then didn't realise because it was either blinded. Because if you're a pilot, again, just reading, picking this up, if you're flying into a plane or towards a plane, you can't measure distance quickly when you can.
And they were wearing supposedly night vision goggles as well. And you know, I'm no expert. You know, I haven't been on that many helicopters. I've been on plenty of planes. But there's a piece of footage that I watched yesterday where you can see the helicopter coming from behind the plane, and it appears to just fly straight into it.
Straight into it, exactly.
And they're given the instruction to follow it in, which is what you hear on the audio clip, which presumably means just keep your distance and stay behind a plane. But as you say, it seems mad to land a helicopter in the same flight path as a passenger
and have all
plane.
that traffic in the same vicinity.
Yeah, very, very strange indeed. Common sense is a word that we use here a lot, and of course we are the home of common sense, as you know, for a long time. Trump, when he made his inauguration speech, talked about common sense. Here he is talking about it again yesterday.
I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game at the highest level.
It really is a fascinating sort of deconstruction of where we are. And again, as you said, Bob, people like to hear the way he talks because that's how they talk. You know, people would have been in the pub last night saying, how could this possibly have happened? Did you know that they were hiring all these people who might not have been qualified to do the job? Etc., you know.
But what happens if that's not the case in this case? I mean, that is a bit of an issue. And this is the problem with Trump, is that you should take him seriously, but not always literally.
No, because what he does, though, is he raises issues. I mean, when he for example, talks about they're eating the cats, and everybody went mad and went, that's ridiculous, nobody's eating cats. You know, it may well be that one or two people did.
I think somebody did.
Yeah, somebody did. But what he did do was he focused everybody's attention on the Venezuelan drug gang problem, which happened to be in a Midwest town in North America. And people started talking about that, and that was why I won the election. So, you know, there's a method in his madness, if you know.
No, I mean, the guy, obviously, there must be a method because he's won a second election after nobody thought he was ever going to. But I just think on this issue, you're right, though, the Trump defies political logic that he can get away with saying something that maybe have no basis in truth, because A, it's a point that he wants to make. There is a wider issue. I'm just not sure the wider issue is necessarily reflected in this. But sure, if you're hiring people for government jobs and they can't do the job and they're a diversity hire, that is an insult both to the taxpayer, but actually it goes back to this thing I was reading last week, Oxford University now. It's basically saying if you're ethnic minority, we're going to dumb down.
Right.
I'm sorry, that is pure racism.
It is. Totally.
Well, I mean, why we're actually going back to a highly racist society because anti-racism is anti-white, and Oxford are basically saying if you're an ethnic minority, we'll assume you're not as intelligent as a white person. I mean, how incredibly offensive and stupid is that? And rightly, people were then calling it out and saying, wow, that is an incredibly racist thing you're saying.
Right. But then if you look, pretty much every week we can find a story where the BBC put a job ad in whichever place they put it, asking for only ethnic minorities to apply for a particular job. White people need not apply. It's as simple as that. And you think, well, hang on a minute. If you said black people should not apply for a job, what do you think would happen?
We're going back to the 1950s.
It's just crazy.
No, absolutely.
Common sense, though, is spreading, and I take the credit for it, obviously, as I would. You would expect that. Last night on Question Time, which gets worse and worse and worse, by the way, I sort of put myself through it every Thursday night. I have to go to bed.
You're a brave man. I've given up.
I gave up on it a long time, but the only reason I watch it now is because I can watch it slightly earlier, because you can watch it early on the iPlayer, so I don't have to stay up so late. But here's James Murray, who apparently is a government minister. God knows how. Did
you see the guy who runs Ryanair, O'Leary?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He was fantastic.
Absolutely slated. Have you got that clip?
We have got that clip. We'll find it, actually. Yeah, we played it yesterday.
That will cheer us up in the morning.
It will cheer us up. I called him a git, which was brilliant.
And Rachel Rubbish.
Yeah, Rachel Rubbish.
And there was a poll on Twitter yesterday. Do you call Rachel from accounts? Is it Rachel from accounts or Rachel Rubbish?
Yeah.
And Rachel with accounts was just winning out.
Right, and she hates that, apparently. Here's James Murray. Even he, apparently, thinks common sense is the way forward.
I think when you talk about the programmes around the diversity, equality, inclusion programmes, I really think this is where we could do with a bit of common sense, because, you know, I think people understand there is a value to having an inclusive approach to your workforce and making sure people have opportunities, but you don't want it to go too far. And I think it is just a common sense question here, where most people have a reasonable view on this.
I don't know what he means by that.
I don't know what he means.
Complete gobbledygook.
But this is the problem. If you're having a DEI policy, it means that you're not hiring. You're either not hiring the most talented because you're deliberately hiring whites or blokes or whatever, and so it doesn't actually make sense. If you're doing the right thing, you don't need a DEI program. So DEI program is an admission of failure on somebody's part. So why have it?
Yeah, and Alison Phillips was on there from the former editor of the Mirror, funnily enough, who I used to work with, who said, oh, well, we need diversity and inclusion policies, because when I started in Fleet Street, you know, it was mostly white middle-aged blokes. Absolute rubbish. Complete rubbish. I mean, I've been in Fleet Street longer than her, right? Yeah. And there were women running newspapers, there were women running features departments, news departments. There's always been very powerful women in newspapers doing very, very good jobs. Unfortunately, she wasn't one of them. You know.
I mean, when I started doing shifts on the Sunday Mirror a long time ago, we had a female editor.
Yeah.
I remember her name in a minute.
Yeah, it was probably Eve Pollard, wasn't it?
It was Eve Pollard.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and Eve Pollard's a fine woman. She's a fantastic. She was a fantastic editor, and she certainly didn't need any help from men to get to where she was. Thank you very much indeed. Married to Sir Nicholas Lloyd, who was also editor of the Daily Express at the same time. Who used to be very frightened of her. But that's another story. Here's Michael O'Leary. We played it yesterday.
Yes,
I mean, we could play it every day from now to Christmas.
We should.
To be honest, here we go.
I get a letter back this week from some dopey junior minister, James Murray, who's the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. He helpfully told me that actually the rate of APD increase is only going up by £2 for those flying short-haul economy. That is 1% of an average airfare. £2 is 1% of an average short-haul economy low fare. I don't know what airline this dopey git actually flies on that has economy airfares of £200, but the £2 is not 1% of an average airfare, but it probably shows you just how out of touch Her Majesty's Treasury are with reality.
Well, I tell you what he's not doing. He's not flying on private jets, because the story that Guido did yesterday about David Lammy spent nearly £1 million.
Yep, he spent £1 million on, and the Labour Party, the amount of criticism that Rishi got for half a dozen flights on a helicopter.
Yes.
And he's clocking up the air miles on private jets. But just on the O'Leary thing, I mean, it just showed the thinking of government. And actually, if you look at that letter, and the letter that O'Leary got back from the government saying, well, you know, it's an irrelevant amount because it's only 1%.
Right.
And actually, O'Leary says that, but if you look at the price of a ticket, it's not 200 quid, it was 44 quid.
And so another £2 is quite a lot.
Tax is already 13 quid.
Yeah.
Tax is now 15 quid on a £44 fare. And he's absolutely right. And this is a problem with the government's growth. It talks about growth. Having kicked the living hell out of the economy last year, it's now in a panic. They're talking about growth, and yet anything and everything they're doing seems to be anti-growth, and the stuff they could do to help growth, they won't do.
No, and they seem to believe that the only way to get growth is to spend public money, which is, one, not their money, and two, it's our money, and three, it doesn't necessarily stimulate anything.
No, it doesn't. Well, it stimulates rich from accounts. But
well, it does. We've got a great clip of her, actually, which we'll do in a minute. We are here, of course, all through the morning until 10 o'clock. It's 18 minutes past 6. Bob Seeley's here with us. Sean in Gloucester says, morning, Mike. Every day that goes by, Trump is making the USA better, while here Keith Starlin is making the UK worse. What have we done so wrong to end up with these morons? Answers on a postcard after this.
The investigators will be looking at, obviously, everything from weather conditions at the time to the experience of the pilots on board both the helicopter and the American Eagle flight itself. But they'll also be looking at whether the rules will need changing, because essentially in charge of operations is an air traffic controller, and you've heard various sound bites of the conversations in the run-up to the collision. But essentially the rules are given out and the instructions are given out by the air traffic controller.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 21 minutes past 6, and of course we are here all the way through until 10 o'clock. Bob Seeley's here with me, former MP for the Isle of Wight. We've already been looking into quite a few clips from yesterday. There's another one we should look at as well, Bob, which was tremendous. Yesterday, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, did the morning round, as they like to call it. Didn't come on this show, funnily enough. Went on everybody else's show, didn't come here.
She still got beasted, though.
I mean, yeah, she did. And she actually, surprisingly, by Richard Madeley.
I know.
You know, not known for his tenacity.
That's glorious.
You know, but it's absolutely amazing. He decided to ask her about her CV and why it was full of lies.
Why did you say that you'd worked at the Bank of England for a decade when, in fact, it was... Well, it wasn't even 6 years, it was 5. I mean, that's exaggeration, isn't it?
Well, I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years, between 2000 and 2006. I was employed by the Bank of England, including I spent just over a year at the British Embassy working in the economics section there, supporting the government and the bank.
Why did you say it was a decade?
Well, I think you're taking... I think it's one interview. I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years. I worked for then at Halifax Bank of Scotland, I think, for 3 years after that. I became an MP when I was 31. But I think in the end, people want to judge me on the job that I'm doing today as Chancellor of the Exchequer. I'm qualified to do this job. But in the end, people are going to judge me. Am I growing the economy? Am I improving their living standards? And I'm determined to do just that.
No and no, I think, are the two answers to those two questions. But also, she's trying to make out it was an interview she gave to somebody, which is the reason why people made the mistake that she worked for the Bank of England for 10 years. No, it was on her CV. She had to change her CV as a result of it being discovered that there were lies on it. She was caught out. So, and she never did answer the question.
No, she didn't. And I have to say it's pretty depressing. And I know that the problem is when the reaction you're going to get from most people is that, oh, politicians lie. Actually, that is not the case. Politicians, a good politician will try to argue his or her case honestly and get the facts, obviously, to fit their interpretation of life. That is part of politics.
That's fine. You can use facts to your advantage, but don't change them.
But the problem is, when you have a government like this Labour one that is systematically lying, and their attitude is, we're morally superior, so that's OK, and we're only lying to the Tories anyway, and we think they're scum.
And they were evil and much worse than us.
Exactly.
So we're much better than them.
So we can lie and it's OK. The problem is then, eventually this government will run out of honesty road, that nobody will believe a word they say.
I think we're already there, actually.
It's happening sooner than we think, unfortunately for them.
Well, look at the Times front page this morning, and I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, that this guy, who is, of course, one of Keir Starmer's big mates, Lord Hermer, who's been, a lawyer in good standing for many a year. I don't take issue with the fact that he's represented some dodgy characters, because obviously some people do that, and that's fine. And if you're a lawyer, you might have to represent the likes of Jerry Adams, but it's rather sort of coincidental, is it not?
I was going to say, it's very coincidental that all these human rights lawyers end up always defending people and presumably getting money from the public purse or somewhere for people who relentlessly attack our country, or certainly against the interests of the British state. And this is the way that international law, as interpreted by these left-wing lawyers, always seems to be used against this country and against democracies more generally.
But what I worry about more is how he now conducts himself as Attorney General, because we got the news this week that not only does he accept that there are certain conflicts of interest that he shouldn't really have, he now says that he recuses himself from actually giving advice to the government, which surely makes his job redundant, doesn't it? If you're Attorney General and you can't advise the government, what's the point of it?
I mean, if that was one or two, fair enough. But seemingly all his clients have spent all their time attacking the government, and he's been representing. The amount of recusing he must be doing is pretty much almost anything.
My Lord Hermer, can you give us some advice on this? No, I'm afraid I can't, because I used to represent Fidel Castro. There's no chance of that. It's just ridiculous. He's now being accused of basically obstructing government and actually not doing his job in an even bigger way, delaying policies because he's taking the view that if there's likely to be a legal challenge to something, we shouldn't bother doing it.
How long do you think he's got in the job?
I would say he's out of the job by March, I think, because I think the pressure's too much now. I mean, it's been relentless for about a month. And it's not getting any better.
No, I mean, this is a sort of, there is a drumbeat of sort of, is this person right for the job? Which is, Jenrick is calling him out very well. Rob Jenrick, he's doing a great job on it. But there isn't a smoking gun from a specific current issue.
No.
That's the thing. So he may hang on there. But I think he's terrible for the government because he reminds people that Starmer's a human rights lawyer with a hard left tendency. Britain is always in the wrong.
And he's his mate as well, which tends to suggest, like the Tulip Sadiq case, where you know, she could have gone before Christmas, right? Instead of which it dragged on and on and on because she was Keir Starmer's best mate in politics. Now she's likely to be extradited to Bangladesh.
I was going to say, is she actually going to be extradited?
Well, she might be. The fact that they're even talking about it is pretty embarrassing.
Do you think this is a great one? I mean, do we think Herman's going to have to give advice on whether she can be extradited?
That's a very good
Is he going to
question.
have to recuse himself because they're all dinner party mates, or is dinner party mate okay?
I know, this is the thing, and so it's a very cosy world that they all inhabit, isn't it? And basically they can't make proper judgments on things because they don't want to upset each other.
I wish somebody would redo the thick of it.
Yes.
But the trouble is, the writers have all gone a bit centrist dad.
Ian, what's his name, Armando, who I used to think was a brilliant
He's
man.
Great.
Brilliant, but he's kind of lost the plot. He's gone all kind of Rory Stewart on
He's gone full on Alistair Campbell.
Yeah, absolutely right. But I mean, that's the other thing. Wasn't there not in that report that came out, the review from the Home Office the other day, which reminded everybody that at one point or other there was a review that they put out that said if you watch the thick of it and you like it, you might be a white supremacist.
Yeah, because that's evidence of being on the... And who was it? My former colleague, Rees-Mogg Jacob, had one of his tweets investigated. And if you like this sort of stuff, that many are suspicious. I'll tell you one other thing that really depresses me about the Home Office and why it's not fit for purpose and it's genuinely scary. For anyone to describe the grooming gangs as alleged.
Incredible.
I'm sorry.
That was incredible.
This is the worst scandal in our country since the enclosure of common land back in the early 18th century in the terms of harm that it does to people. And when you have a government department saying, well, you know, this mass raping may have happened, it's alleged to have happened.
I mean, there are court cases still going through the system at the moment.
Please.
It is mad. Talk about annexing land, by the way.
Terrible.
Telegraph's got a story saying a tenth of farmland is now going to be axed for net zero. Solar farms and tree planting will replace food production. I mean, how do they think that's going to play out? If you can't make food in the country and instead you're sort of growing electricity, if you like, so that people can get very wealthy on it, it's not a recipe for success, is it?
No, it's all a money. I mean, this is Lord Hermer is harming the government.
Lord Harmer, Keir Starmer. I mean, it's all certainly
on a relatively low-level way. But he's survivable. But the damage that Ed Miliband is doing not only to this country in his sort of reckless deindustrialisation, but actually the damage he will do to Starmer's reputation, to Labour's reputation, I don't see how long he can survive if Labour is serious about getting more than 20% in the polls coming in the next election.
Well, Miliband's another one, isn't he? I mean, he was on the missing list yesterday, and we were sort of jokingly saying, has anybody seen him? And he sort of picked his head above the parapet yesterday and started putting out a few tweets about how net zero is still very much what our focus is. But apparently on Tuesday, he was in Cabinet saying we can't have a third runway at Heathrow.
And the problem with this is that because this is all caught up in Labour's internal battles, we might get the third runway signed off, but the quid pro quo is going to be shutting down oil and gas in Scotland. So the front page of the Mail today is basically saying, you know, prove you're on the side of growth, because the courts have basically said no to Jackdaw and Rosebank, and instead we're going to have more liquid gas that's going to come from the Middle East. We're going to be reliant on oil and oil products
we bring in
somewhere else.
gas from America, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
So, I mean, that is not, in fact, even if I cared about the green agenda, which I don't really, it's not greener. No, it's actually worse.
I mean, I do to a certain extent because it's important and looking after the world is important. But the problem is our green agenda is actually very ungreen. By offshoring our economy to China, which is building 2 coal-fired power stations a week, we are polluting the world in order to give ourselves slightly better emission figures. We should be onshoring, bringing back all this industry here and working out how to do it better than China, not building coal-fired power stations and reducing the cost of energy. You're right, it's a massive
con. And they're all swallowing it as if it's real. Let's get a voice note from James on the Labour Party.
Morning, Mike. James from Blackburn. We've got you. It's Friday. It's day 211 of this hapless Labour government. I mean, I can't believe it's only been 211 days. But we have had 74 different relaunches in that time. I mean, I wish they could turn the boats round quicker than they turn their policies round, because they haven't got a bloody clue. This week, well, we're going to go for growth. We've tanked the economy, so now we'll go for growth by building a runway that none of us believe in by 2050. And we don't know how we'll build it, who's going to build it, but we'll just have a plan by the summer. Christ, it's do you think they just get to the end of the week, close their doors back at the second homes that we pay for all the heating for and just pay for in general, shut the doors and just go?
I mean, it is incredible, isn't it? And this is how the ordinary people of this country actually understand the world to be. Yeah. They can see what's going on. Yeah. You know, people are not stupid. They realise that this is all a complete smoke and mirrors job. And here's this latest announcement. The UK has announced up to £5 million worth of extra funding for education programmes, not here, not in France, not in Germany, in Tunisia, for potential migrants, in the hope it will make them less likely to make the journey across the Channel.
Again, this is one of these other big lies. If we spend lots and lots and lots of money...
Have a read of some Thomas Hardy and see if that will keep you in Tunisia.
But it's, okay, just on that point, what do they scrapped 17 million specialist maths education for bright kids from state schools.
Right.
Same day, they announced 17 million to UNRWA, the UN,
who have now been outlawed by Israel.
Yeah,
right?
and is full of Hamas supporters.
Yeah.
I mean, please.
I mean, it is ridiculous, isn't it? Now, one of the things we do on a Friday is we play out some gaffes that we've had through the course of the week. Some of them on this show, some of them on other shows, quite a lot of them on Kevin O'Sullivan's show, it has to be said. But here's one on my show, and it's about you, funnily enough.
Me?
Have a look. Yeah.
Right, me.
He hasn't got the backing. Apparently, he doesn't get on with Claire Rayner, or Claire Rayner doesn't like him.
Angela Rayner.
Sorry, I do apologise.
He might not get on with Claire Rayner either, but
but he's not getting the money.
Claire Rayner, who was famously the mother of Jay Rayner, the restaurant critic, who blocked me on Twitter because we had a row once about whether or not there should be tips for people in restaurants.
Yes.
Very strange.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
I mean, I don't know if it's early onset Alzheimer's or what it is.
No, it's all right.
I do occasionally get these things wrong.
No, people do it all the time. But that's why we have these gaffes. There's loads of them. Don't worry. We're not singling you out.
I should make more.
We're not singling you out. We just thought we'd play you that way while you're here. We've got much more to do. 6:33. Coming up, we're going to talk about the BBC, who are apparently too scared to speak up about Russell Brand. Yep. We'll talk as well about £1 in every £15 spent on the benefits business is either fraud or a mistake, which is extraordinary. And we'll talk a bit about Russia as well, and the Sun's defence correspondent, who's apparently now got a warrant out for his arrest. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:36. We are here, of course, every single weekday morning from 6 until 10. 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory. We've got Bob Seeley with us here this morning, looking at all the stories in the papers. We're going to cross live in a moment to Pennsylvania to speak to Dr. Philip Mann, who's an aviation expert. Let's get a quick voice note, though, from Andy.
Good morning, Mike. Andy in Portsmouth. Donald Trump strikes again. He is the gift that keeps on giving. I love the way he talks. Yeah, he says it how it is. He shoots from the hip, and he wouldn't have said those things if he didn't know something, in my opinion. So, and I also agree that, if you're not qualified for the job, especially something as important as your air traffic control, then, you shouldn't be doing the job. So, fair play to him. Great show, Mike.
Andy, thanks very much indeed. I think an awful lot of people would echo what you've just said, and that's why they like listening to Donald Trump. He doesn't sound like a politician. He sounds like a guy that you would meet down the pub, basically.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, in my view.
And I think it makes a break from people who sound contrived and controlled and incredibly robotic.
And certainly the people of this country, and I can't speak for the people in America, but I know them reasonably well, are sick of inquiries. They're sick of people saying, we're going to make sure that we find out what the investigative report will be in 2 years' time, and then we'll bring you some, conclusions at that point.
Yeah. What is this? What have we had under this government? An inquiry every week, but not into
the grooming gangs, the one that everybody wants them to have.
Yeah.
Let's have a quick chat with Dr. Philip Mann. He's an aviation expert at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology in Pennsylvania. Dr. Philip, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much for talking to us. Terrible accident yesterday, almost unbelievable when I came in yesterday morning to see what had happened. And I mean, whatever you may think of what Donald Trump has said about the DEI problem, he was right to say that it should never have happened. It must have been preventable. It seems almost incredible that a helicopter could be in the same airspace as a plane coming into land 400 feet from a runway.
Well, it's relatively normal, actually, that military helicopters, especially in that area, it's very congested airspace, has a lot of military operations and bases in the area. And during a lot of operations, helicopters follow the same rules as everybody else. And there's very clearly some breakdown in the chain of events that cause what is otherwise a very routine, simple operation to end this way. But it's not an unusual thing. And with these pilots, commercial pilots, these military pilots, we're talking folks that collectively have thousands of hours doing this.
Yeah, they do. But then you've got some audio footage that we've heard of the tower saying to the helicopter pilot, "Can you see them?" i.e., can you see the plane that seems to be right in front of you? And from the footage that I've seen, and obviously I'm no expert, it looks as though the helicopter is flying behind the plane and appears to fly into it.
Yeah, and it could be that, and this is just my speculation, the NTSB will have their preliminary report in the next 30 days or so, and then we'll have a better idea. But it could very well be that due to fatigue, due to stress, due to whatever, that because there were lots of aircraft coming in, it wasn't just a Black Hawk and a CRJ. There have been several aircraft coming in, even at night when it's not as busy, and they could have looked off to their right or left or whatever and just saw an aircraft that they thought was a CRJ. And it was just a different plane. They just didn't see, same as somebody would drive across an intersection, not see somebody stepping into the intersection. Well, they're looking for the car behind them. They're not looking for the person.
So this
walking.
is a slightly more devastating result, I'm afraid, from running into somebody in a car. I mean, that's the point. And I think the point that Trump was making as well is that, if these are very sensitive and dangerous situations, then you must have people who are not going to suffer from stress or be tired or be in some way, distressed about something that's going on in their home. In the end result of something like this is that 67 people are dead.
It is, and it is a constant battle in the air traffic space, and this is true. Air traffic controller qualifications are comparable to what commercial airline pilot qualifications are. Their medical histories, they can't be on any like Benadryl or drugs that would cause them to lose anything like that. But it's a constant battle between the workload and the staffing and the fatigue, and the FAA has put in over the last 10 years or so has put in numerous technologies and reporting systems and new rules to make sure air traffic controllers get their fatigue taken care of, to make sure pilots and air crews get their fatigue taken care of.
But we're also told that there was a shortage of staff on the night as well.
Well, yeah, and there has been an ongoing long-term, and we're talking going back a couple decades, shortage of air traffic controllers, because the air traffic control pipeline is several years long. You don't just hire somebody and stick them in a tower. You hire somebody, you send them through a couple years of training and qualification, maybe get them out to another facility for a couple more years of qualification. It's a long, long pipeline.
Yeah. But
and
yeah,
in that process,
it sounds like a lot of the public service jobs in this country, though, there's just not very well managed and not very well run. There's plenty of people that can do jobs, and plenty of people that can be trained. But if there's a shortage of staff, then there must be a reason for that. And you know, again, the devastating results are simply not acceptable.
Absolutely.
And what's your view then of if there is somebody who was at fault here? Would it be? I mean, certainly it seems to be it wouldn't be the pilots of the commercial plane who were just doing presumably what they're told at that point. They're just flying in on a path that's been set for them by the tower. So the helicopter, Black Hawk, should have been more careful, I suppose, is the point.
Yeah, well, I think it's fair to say that everybody should have been a little more careful. And I don't. Again, there are alerting systems. The commercial aircraft has alerting systems that the Black Hawk probably didn't have, and we don't know if the commercial pilot just ignored the alert or because we're only seeing a very, very small part of the data that the NTSB is going to use to gather this, because they're going to check all the recordings going frontwards, backwards, a long way, plus where were they, what were they doing. You know,
and once the moment of truth came, presumably there wasn't much time. You know, once the conversation was, have you seen it? Then you kind of talk in 10 seconds before you've hit it.
Yeah, and that's that is it's a very high stakes environment, and taking off and landing are the most dangerous parts of flight.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is if somebody loses attention for just a little bit, and right now we just don't have. You know, there are technologies being investigated that might enhance this, like augmented mixed reality displays that might draw a circle around the plane they're supposed to be paying attention to or something. But a lot of that's not there right now.
Yeah.
And you know, honestly it is a testament though to the safety of air traffic that every single one of these crashes is newsworthy.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've speaking to friends.
They're just not big enough to make the news anymore.
Speaking of friends in America, just yesterday, who said this just hasn't happened for such a long time. It's awful. Yeah. Dr. Philip Mann, thanks very much for talking to us, aviation expert there at the Harrisburg University of Science and Technology in Pennsylvania. Bob Seeley's here. I mean, it's true, isn't it, Bob? There's not much time. Once they're in the air together, presumably it's a sort of split-second decision-making process that if you get it wrong, that's the result.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting what you were saying at the end. The planes don't crash anymore.
No.
I mean, in the last few years, there's hardly been any crashes in the Western world. And so when this happens, it is massive news because it is just so rare.
Right.
But it seems pretty much human error here in an incredibly busy airspace. That shouldn't be as busy. But FAA staffing has been a problem for years in the States. And I've read articles about it before. And unfortunately, this seems to be... Well, part of that now is that actually...
But as I say, it's a modern-day malaise, it seems to me, you know, because you think of all the things, places like the NHS, you know, we've always got a shortage of doctors, we've always got a shortage of nurses, we all seem to have a shortage of train drivers, we've got a shortage of almost every public sector business that we have appears to be not run very well because they don't have enough people.
No, and I mean, to give you an example of dentistry. Dentistry was an issue on the Isle of Wight. We didn't have enough NHS dentists. You go and talk to ministers, one of the problems was that the dental authorities, the National whatever, Dental Council, whatever it's called, restricted the amount of foreign dentists that could sit an exam. Why? Because they wanted to restrict the number of dentists in this country because it's in the interest of dentists.
Yes,
there's a restriction.
Keeps their pay higher, right?
Do I think that we should be flooding the country with immigrant dentists? I mean, India produces great dentists. It's got great dental schools. So if you want to solve a problem of dentists quickly in this country, you just double the capacity in the people who sit the UK exams. You get them in. You speed up the processes. But again, the NHS process for getting a dentist into the NHS is more complex, more bureaucratic than getting someone into private practice, which seems to be bizarre. Why not have the same process? Why not speed these processes
Similarly,
up?
the same problem in the medical doctor business, isn't it? Because the BMA have limited the numbers of people that they want to train as doctors because they want to keep their prices high.
You know, we didn't take on vested interests enough. I think that is now clear. But
and then once you're in that place, it takes a very long time to turn it around. It's like a supertanker, isn't it?
It is. And we, I think the reason why people, even people who may not like Trump particularly, are impressed by what's happening in America and like people like J.D. Vance is because he's just getting things done. He's just signing these executive orders. So we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and people are going to get on with it. I'm sure the state senates, you know, somewhere in New York or California are going to try to fight back. But he's just bulldozing stuff through. And I think a lot of people in this country, including myself, and I was an MP, I'm thinking, well, why can't we, why couldn't we do that?
Exactly.
I would love to know what the UK equivalent of an executive order is. Is it orders in council? Is it just the fact that
Well,
we've got to
I spoke to
this...
someone about this the other day, and they said, well, the thing is they've got a different system there. I said, yeah, but when you have people like Boris Johnson with an 80-seat majority, or Keir Starmer now with 270, surely he can just do what he wants, can't he? But he's not doing it.
You can, especially now that we've left the European Union.
Yeah.
We are no longer, have to sort of doff our caps to Brussels. We can get on and do this stuff. It actually seems to be a crisis of leadership in politics. We're so used to taking the military lead from the States and the political and diplomatic lead from the European Union. We've forgotten what it's like to be an independent country to do this
Totally.
stuff.
I think that's right. And it's the 5th anniversary of Brexit today, by the way, so I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. Let's get a quick voice note from Mark on Rachel from Accounts.
Hey.
Morning, Mike. It's Mark in Lancashire. I see Rachel from customer service is busy casting magic spells again, doing her Sorcerer's Apprentice act. She must have forgotten to say Shazam straight after she tried to magically turn 6 years into a decade.
Let's hope she doesn't turn 6 years of government into a decade. We can't be having that. But absolutely right. Mark came on yesterday and said that it's with every statement that's made by this government, you expect them to say abracadabra at the end of it, because that's the only way any of it's going to actually happen and come true, like some kind of bizarre magic act at the bottom of the Pontins holiday camp.
Your radio contributors, I think Alan Partridge would call it radio gold.
It is. It's brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant.
Their straplines are fantastic.
Yeah, and also these are the people who are supposedly being governed by these idiots, right? And they're not, and they're seeing right through them.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no respect, and everybody thinks that they're doing a terrible job. It's that simple. Coming up, we're going to talk a bit about the 5th anniversary of Brexit. What were you doing? And also, if you had £5 million to give to some people to do something with it, what would you do? We've given it to Tunisia to teach people about English so they don't come here. Doesn't seem to make much sense to me either. This is Talk.
Is Rachel Reeves right that a third runway at Heathrow will boost growth? Or is Michael O'Leary, the boss of Ryanair, right, who says she hasn't got a clue? Heathrow is a dead cat. It won't come until 2040 or 2050 at the earliest. Who's right?
That if this was China, I mean, they are planning to build over 100 new airports next year. In the next 12 months. And in the last 5-year plan, they had 40 built. And we're arguing over a single runway for years.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:51. I'm Mike Graham. Bob Seeley's here with us. We're looking through the papers. A couple of big stories to talk about. In addition, we'll get to this one in a minute. Every 15 seconds in London, there's a ULEZ fine issued, which doesn't come as any great surprise to me. More grist to the mill for Sadiq Khan, who I refuse to call Sir Sadiq Khan. I'm just not going to do it. He's a disaster,
truly,
isn't he?
Truly awful politician.
Yeah.
A truly disastrous mayor, and London deserves so much better than this.
It really
individual.
does. Let's speak about Brexit, because 5 years ago it all looked very different, didn't it? Suddenly we had this. I mean, I was actually, very optimistic in January of 2020 because, suddenly I thought Boris Johnson's got, and finally, after having spent, I think when you and I first met, it was that summer of 2019 in the tent of shame down in Westminster, where we sat endlessly talking and talking and talking, and nothing was happening. I remember coming in on a Saturday once, there was a session, wasn't there? And it didn't go anywhere. Stalemate everywhere. So many people in the Conservative Party didn't want to leave the European Union, and they kept stamping their feet. 5 years on.
We had a bloc that were trying to be disruptive, but the majority wanted to get it out. And the problem is that people like Dominic Grieve were working with people like Hilary Benn and Starmer to do everything they could
to undermine it,
and to get us back in, to effectively overrule the largest exercise in democracy. And one of the reasons we got the Brexit we did was because they were so arrogant, so determined to negate the wishes of the British people.
And people forget this about Starmer, that he wanted a second referendum.
Absolutely.
And he was very dogmatic about everything.
Have you? I'm sure you're going to play it soon, but have you seen all those clips now where on one hand he's saying I'm against it, Jeremy Corbyn's my best mate?
Yes.
I've never liked Jeremy Corbyn.
No.
I thought we need to rejoin the European Union.
We played all the stuff about Trump the other day. Was I don't want him to live around for dinner. He's a very dangerous man. If he gets elected, it's dangerous for the world. And then I just wish to my we can even, I don't know if we can find it before the end of the hour. But there's so much what I would call absolute and utter hypocrisy. We had him the other day saying under Labour, council tax will be frozen. Mark my words, not a penny more will you pay. And people are just going, hey, he's just lying now. So everything he says is now a lie, basically, which is unfortunate. But do you remember where you were when Brexit kind of happened?
I was on the island. I remember waking up, and it was sort of the BBC, when I still, in the days that I still bothered to listen to Radio 4 in the morning, the BBC was funereal. I mean, they weren't quite playing death marches, and they didn't quite, you imagine the black armbands, and they were said Britain has voted to leave the European Union. I mean, they managed to do it in between the tears.
Unbelievable. And then, but there was that feeling of optimism. I remember I was actually feeling very well, because for some reason, I don't know, and I'd been to Chinatown the day before, and I suddenly felt very unwell. And I now say that I don't know whether that was some kind of COVID-related thing, but I had to go to this party. There was a big Parliament Square thing that went on, which I missed, couldn't get to it because it was too busy. Got to a party, which I think Nigel Farage was throwing, and there was a real sense that, we can actually now do something. And then suddenly COVID happened, and that was the end of that.
Brexit's taking a lot longer. I mean, look, there are people who say there's lots of benefits. We've seen lots of benefits, and one is we're not tied to the European Union. We don't have to spend God knows how many billions on giving money to the European Union. So we are a lot better off. And there
Except
are many
the Labour Party is going to drag us back into it, isn't it?
Well, they're going to try to, no doubt. But I mean, there's only so far that they can go. What we are not doing enough of is actually using the benefits. But even Starmer is saying, we don't have to listen to the European Union on AI, so we can do something different. Like all the industries where we are potentially up there with China and the United States are industries where we need to depart from European standards, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's AI, whether it's these sort of tech stuff, all this stuff. We need the freedom to make our own laws, which are going to be much closer to the US, rather than this highly restrictive approach that the European Union takes, which is the principle you say no first, and then you allow something through. And actually, we've got a chance to move away from that. And the failure of Brexit has not been Brexit itself, because I voted for it as you did, but it's the fact that our political leaders have not been brave enough in what they've been doing.
No.
And it's taken an awful lot longer. And I'm hoping once we get this shower out in a few years'
It's almost like
time,
they've opened the door, but they're too frightened to step out into the street.
Yeah, we need, once we get this Labour shower out, then we need to start making progress on this ASAP.
Yeah.
And actually, you're right, we've wasted years.
We have. Let's go back to Starmer, because we found the Trump clips. Let's have a look at this.
I love it.
Of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner, but don't underestimate the danger to the world if Trump is re-elected this time around. I'm anti-Trump. I would like to send my warmest congratulations to President Trump on his inauguration as the 47th President of the United States.
His voice has actually got more clipped, hasn't it, over the years? I've got a piece in the mail today from the guy
I'm reading it
from Dead Ringers, John Colshaw,
who
basically says that Keir Starmer's speaking style is like audio constipation. He's right.
He is.
The 47th President of the United States. I don't know where he got that from.
He's very mimickable.
Yes.
It's so, what's in the word if it's very nasal?
It is.
Adenoidal?
Adenoidal, yes, he is. Absolutely, it's very weird. Now, I have to say, I don't really want to talk about this, but because I've opened page 3 of the Daily Mail, there are 2 very large pictures of David Beckham in his new underpants from Hugo Boss.
I'm trying not to
I'm sure
look.
it's one for the girls, or possibly some of the boys as well. Not particularly one for me, but I mean, he does look pretty good, doesn't he?
He's
49.
He's looking good for his age.
Yeah, not bad at all.
And the underpants aren't too tight, so it's not...
No. It doesn't make you want to buy them, though, does it?
No.
Shall we just move on?
I'm happy with my boxes.
Yeah, just move on. Let's talk about... oh, hang on. We've got a voice note from Matt on Rachel Reeves' CV.
Hey, Mike, it's Matt from Doncaster. So if I lied while I was doing my job, the class is gross misconduct. These clowns are being exposed for their lies every single day. When is somebody going to hold them accountable? When is somebody going to step in and make them justify their actions? Council tax going up. Water rates, just exposed yesterday, going up on average 26%. On top of everything else that's going on, they're just a bunch of clowns. Somebody needs to get a grip in power and bring these bozos down before it's too late.
It is extraordinary. It's just ridiculous. One final one. About £1 in every £15 spent on benefits last year was fraudulently claimed or paid by mistake. I mean, £10 billion of taxpayers' money paid out for bogus or erroneous claims.
This is so painful. I don't even want to... I can't bear it.
No.
I mean, have you seen the other thing about... There's in the... Yesterday, somebody from the Centre for Policy Studies was tweeting it out. For every social care worker visa, that person brings in 5 dependents.
Yes.
And from Zimbabwe, they're bringing 10 dependents.
Well, I tell the story of a Border Force guy. I've told it, I think, 3 times already this week, but I'll tell it again. 3 nurses come into Heathrow, all armed with visas to work in the National Health Service. Each of them have got a husband, each of them have got 5 kids. 21 people for 3 jobs.
I know. It's just, I can't bear it.
I know. It's bonkers, isn't it?
I can't bear it. It's just what's happening.
Yeah, it really is mad. But, you know, listen, Bob, it's been great to see you. We're almost out of time for the first hour of the show, coming up to 7 o'clock. What are you doing for the weekend? Anything exciting?
I think I'm off to the island tomorrow.
Oh, very nice.
I love my island. I'm doing a bit of wood shopping.
Good.
Keep my stocks up.
Hopefully they don't shut the ferries down when it's too rough, do they?
They do occasionally shut the ferries down. Yeah, it's the tail end of storms. Yeah, but keep fingers crossed.
Keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully we'll be all right. We'll be coming back to you with lots more coming up in the next day. Isabel Oakeshot's here, our international editor. We'll see what she makes of 5 years on from Brexit. You can send us your memories as well. This is Talk. I'm Mike Graham. Back after the news.
Spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. Shot from distance. is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in or far ball. Slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspects in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning and welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 7. It's still a bit dark out there. It's raining, it's wet, it's cold, it's damp. It's, you know, it's January, but soon it will be February and there will be a new light lighting up the horizon over the weekend. 1st of February, looking forward to it. It could be better than January, hopefully. Maybe the Labour government will discover what growth actually means as opposed to keeping telling us that they're making growth happen without it happening. I'm asking Keir Starmer to show us his growth. That's what I'm talking about this morning because it's about time we saw what he was going on about. David Beckham's doing a bit of that in the papers, but we're not going to talk too much about that. It's a bit embarrassing. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We're going to talk to Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, coming up shortly. We'll be asking her about the Telegraph front page, which says basically a tenth of farmland is going to be axed for net zero. We're also going to talk about 5 years on from Brexit. We supposedly left the European Union 5 years ago to the day. I was just talking to Bob Seeley there, who said it just hasn't been done properly. Nigel Farage has been talking about it in the papers today. The Labour Party didn't want it. Keir Starmer tried to get a second referendum. The Lib Dems were behind that as well. Some people in the Tory party, including people like David Gauke, just didn't want to play and wanted to undermine it at every single step of the way. Nigel Farage in the Express today says he doesn't really even think Boris Johnson's heart was in it in the first place. So we'll talk a bit about that Brexit anniversary, and we want to hear from all of you. 0344 499 1000. Also, it's a DEI special here this morning because Donald Trump has really set the cat amongst the pigeons yesterday, giving a press conference in the White House briefing room for the first time as the 47th president, and he said this.
The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway.
I mean, I'm sorry, it's a very serious story. 67 people have died, but if Donald Trump is right about the FAA recruitment policies, where they're actually asking people who have got severe intellectual disabilities to come and work for them, controlling the airspace above the Capitol building in the White House, you really do have to wonder if the world has gone completely mad, don't you? 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Memories of Brexit. I've got this from David, who says, "Morning, Mike. On Brexit, I was on holiday in France with my girlfriend. I woke up, made some coffee with the radio on and heard the great news. I took the coffee to my girlfriend and broke the news. She broke down in tears. It was then that I knew the relationship probably wouldn't last." I assume you found a new girlfriend, but there we are. Let's get a voice note from Laura.
Morning, Mike. Laura in Wiltshire. I read the front of the Daily Telegraph today with absolute horror, re the solar panels going all over our beautiful farmland, which actually does something useful. If they are intent on just doing solar as opposed to things like small nuclear reactors, which surely are a more sensible idea, then they should be mandated to put them first on council buildings, schools, hospitals, airports, supermarkets, all new builds. Please insist on some common sense, Mike.
Yes, we do insist on common sense here, and we have it with every single second of the show that we do here. We are the home of common sense. Isabel Oakeshott also is akin and signed up to common sense throughout her career. Isabel, very good morning to you.
Morning. I couldn't believe that press conference by Donald Trump yesterday. You played out the perfect clip there. There was a lot to choose from, by the way. I had another favourite, which was the moment that he laid into the boss of the transport department, basically calling the guy a disaster. I think the word he used was a disaster, and then went on to say that the guy was very good at bullshit. That was the actual word he used. And as you say, this is a very serious story, and it's just the only reason I've got a smile on my face is because Donald Trump's language is so entertaining for us Brits when we are so bored of hearing the robotic Keir Starmer. He does have a point, doesn't he? You know, if the policy is actually to be inclusive of people with, quote, severe intellectual disability, it's kind of an accident waiting to happen.
Exactly.
And it did happen.
And I think the trouble for all of us is that we know that whenever, you know, we think about the United States of America, we know that we're doing the same thing here. And one of the reasons why our state, the ship of state, if you like, is kind of, you know, falling behind and sort of sliding into the sea slowly, capsizing, is because it's being run by people who think that the DEI business is a good idea. That, you know, let's all be terribly inclusive. Let's get more dwarfs. Let's get more intellectually challenged people. And I think he was saying that in January, the Biden administration actually ordered people with severe mental disability to be given jobs controlling aircraft. It's completely bonkers.
Yeah, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, that is actually insane. And Trump made big politics out of this yesterday. And if he's to be believed, and I haven't checked out whether the chronology of events is as he says it is, but essentially he said he put better measures in place when he was president. Yeah. Biden then unravelled them, and only last week Trump tried to put them all back in place, and not in time to make enough difference for this accident not to happen. So if that is all true, then Trump can justifiably make tremendous political capital out of this awful human tragedy. And there's no holding him back, is there? He's full on, absolutely gone for it.
And the thing, and I said this, sorry to interrupt you, I said this earlier, that I was listening to some of the commentary around it, you know, by some of our colleagues in the broadcast business, and they were all horrified, as they always are, you know. This has never happened before, you know, so soon after a terrible disaster where people have died, you know, he's using it for political capital. Well, actually, no, he's not absolutely using it for that. What he's doing is saying that people are sick to death of inquiries, sick to death of being told we'll find out what happens in about 3 years' time and report back. You know, no, people who talk as normal people do were saying yesterday, how could this possibly have happened? We need to know. He said it shouldn't have happened. Somebody should have prevented it from happening. He's absolutely right.
Completely. And can you imagine if we'd had someone like Donald Trump leading our country after the Axel Rudikabana horror?
Yeah.
You know, the equivalent of that would have been Keir Starmer standing up and saying, you know, how horrific this was, and here's what we know, folks, including the whole terror dimension of it. But instead we got British politics, which is to pretend there's nothing much to see here, let's all move on while there's an investigation underway, which excuses politicians from having to say anything about anything. I love the way Trump rips up that playbook. He's just like, you know, I'm just going to tell you what I know. And I'm just going to tell you as much as I can so that you don't get fobbed off. You don't get told, we'll come back to you in 3 years' time when you've all forgotten about it, because there's been so many other tragedies in the interim.
Right, exactly right. And I've just got a bit of breaking news here from the FAA, obtained by the Associated Press. Apparently there was only one air traffic controller working at the time of the fatal collision. I mean, that beggars belief, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know how many should be on duty, but it sure as hell sounds like there should be more than one presiding over.
Well, what happens when he goes to the toilet?
Well, you make a very, very good point there. And is it perhaps that, you know, some of the staff there only work on certain days? Are they the kinds of people that put at the end of their emails, please note my working hours are and my working days are? I'd fire all those people, you know.
Definitely, absolutely right. Let's talk about what's on the front pages here this morning. Although, before we do that, maybe we should mention Brexit. 5 years on, obviously, you know, you'll remember where you were, not so much on the day of the result of the referendum, but more on this day, because I remember feeling a great sense of optimism and thinking, you know, although I wasn't feeling particularly well, I seem to remember, there was basically a sort of a feeling in there. You and I may have been at the same party. I was at a party on Piccadilly somewhere, and we were sort of toasting. Jim Davidson was there, Nigel Farage was there, toasting this brand new future that we were about to look forward to, where we were unfettered by those awful people in the European Union, and it all seemed like a great idea, and it kind of all just didn't happen.
Well, it was a great idea, and I do remember where I was. I think I was on the backstage at the big rally that we had to celebrate
in Parliament Square.
In Parliament Square, and I know Julia Hartley-Brewer was there, and a number of court colleagues were probably there too, and giving speeches, and we sang, and it was really an absolutely amazing historic moment. And 5 years on, it has not yet fulfilled anything like its potential. I mean, Nigel Farage himself has been quite open that a number of things are not less difficult than they were, they're more difficult than they were. That doesn't mean it wasn't the right idea. It doesn't mean that it's not a great thing that we have the potential now to make the best of it, but this government isn't going to do it. It's been a massive, massive historic betrayal, not just by this new government, which is barely concealing its desire for closer ties with the EU. In fact, Rachel Reeves articulated that earlier this week, saying we've got to get closer to the EU. It's the last thing that we need to be doing. They're a basket case. They're going down the pan faster than we are. But it's not just this government that is going to increase the betrayal. It's what the Tories did, because most people voted for Brexit for one reason, and that is immigration. They were horrified by the uncontrolled immigration into our country that was associated with free movement of people. You know, that was part of the deal if you're in the EU. And so we ended free movement of people, but guess what? We replaced it with come one, come all from all other parts of the world. Brilliant. So 1 million net migration. Yeah, that's not what people signed up for. We've got to undo that.
It's absolutely right. And Nigel Farage has written in the Express today, he's also in the Telegraph, but he's basically said he thinks that actually, in the end, looking back, he doesn't even believe Boris Johnson's heart was actually really in it.
Well, I mean, that doesn't really surprise me, because Boris Johnson notoriously wrote 2 different articles, one in favour of Brexit and one against Brexit, before he decided which one he fancied publishing. So, you know, Boris Johnson is an opportunist, and there are many good things about Boris Johnson, but no one can say that he's an ideologue. You know, all the things we thought that we were could be sure of about Boris Johnson, in particular that he's a libertarian, you know, that he believes in freedom of choice, all went out the window under the pressure of COVID, didn't they? I mean, this was a guy that used to say, you know, don't let's worry about standards for school lunch for kids. Let's shove them some pies through the railings of the playground if they're not getting turkey Twizzlers. You know, that's how much he was in favour of freedom. And then he went on to be the Prime Minister that locked us down again and again and again. So this isn't a man of high principle. He is a man who looks out first and foremost for Boris Johnson. He did good things. I don't want to take away from his leadership on Ukraine and a number of other things. But he didn't make the most of Brexit. He will, of course, blame the pandemic for that loss of opportunity.
No doubt. What we can't see the Labour government blaming anything on, really, apart from themselves, is this farmland move that they're making, this land grab that they appear to be making. And I can't help thinking there's much more to this than just a kind of Westminster obsession with not understanding the countryside and deliberately changing the way that Britain actually produces food, because that, to all intents and purposes, is what's happening. We're told from the Telegraph's front page story, a tenth of farmland is going to be axed for net zero.
Marvellous. Well, look, farmers, here's my message to you. You can't have it both ways. You can't come out and complain, rightly in my view, about the inheritance tax bill that you're now facing on the basis of food security on the one hand, and on the other hand, sell off your farmland for solar panels. Which is it? You know, if you believe in food security, then don't sell out for net zero. And as far as I know, the government is not yet saying that they're going to actually compulsorily purchase farmland. Right. So this absolutely hideous policy of carpeting half of Britain with solar panels, not literally half, but a great deal of Britain.
But it will feel like it, though.
It relies on the cooperation of farmers. So there's a simple way to thwart this, at least in the first instance. Farmers, don't sell your land for these purposes. I know it's tempting, but you don't have to do it. And if you do it, you can't complain about the inheritance tax thing.
No, exactly right. And the thing that worries me more about this than anything is that it's Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, who's kind of, you know, pushing it forward and championing it. And his previous job, before he became an MP, was to be head of Lambeth Council. You know, a more unlikely kind of job to prepare you for reconstructing Britain's rural landscape, I can't think of.
I mean, these guys don't get the countryside, do they? There's so many things that they don't get. They don't get the mindset of people that live in rural communities. They don't understand the way the rich work, the super rich. They don't understand why, if you just clobber everybody at that end with incredible taxes, they just leave. They don't get it. They are of the world of Lambeth Council. That is a microcosm of the Labour Party. It is those inner city councils up and down the countries. That's their little mindset, and I don't think that we can change that, but we can put up a resistance to some of this stuff. And you know, solar panels are not things of beauty.
No.
There's a huge solar farm just outside the village where I live in the Cotswolds, and you know, yes, it's better than huge pylons without a doubt, but it still looks really weird. And when the sun shines on it, you think it's a lake, and it's actually just loads and loads of plastic.
Yeah, it's very unpleasant. I'm not in favour of it. Just before you go, I'll give you this piece of good news. I don't know whether you heard it earlier. The new policy on stopping the boats and the snaggling guns, or whatever Keir Starmer wants to call them this week. Basically, we're giving some money to Tunisia to educate people to learn English so that they don't want to come to Britain. I don't even understand the logic of that.
Right, okay. But the more they understand English, the more they may be tempted to think, could get a nice job over in England
as a
Deliveroo driver or something. Like wackadoodle, more wackadoodle nonsense, more taxpayers' money down the drain, more hopeless, completely ineffectual attempts to stop the boats. The only way to stop the boats is to turn back the boats. Forget all these little bits of tinkering around the edges that the government announced yesterday, a new power to examine the mobile phones of people, or arrest people on the boats for threatening to throw people overboard. No, just turn them back.
Yes.
It's not complicated, guys. We have the power to do it.
Also, you know, a bit of a pop quiz for the people making new laws that illegal migrants won't apply to them. Is that when people tend to be illegal migrants, they tend to break the law. They don't care what the law says. They don't care what new law you've introduced. They're criminals.
Yeah, I mean, they're adventurers, they're taking their chances. And honestly, in many ways, I don't blame them. The statistics are all in their favour. If they've got a rubbish life somewhere, not necessarily a war zone, probably not a war zone, and they think, well, they've got the resources to get themselves over to Calais, a pretty much better life beckons. You know, all they need to do is get it over the channel safely, then they get a bunch of free stuff, and sooner or later they get the right to remain and build a new life in Britain. Good for them, bad for us.
I mean, to be honest, some parts of London are more of a war zone than where some of these people are coming from. So they better bring as much armour with them as they can possibly carry. Isabel, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Isabel Oakeshott there, Talk's international editor. How about this from, who is it? Glenn from Leeds, who says, Mike, I'm recruiting for my steak restaurant. If you're a vegan, a haemophiliac, can't take the heat, can only work from home, visually impaired, can't work nights or weekends, we want to hear from you. DEI in action, and soon to close down hospitality. That's, I mean, it's funnier than you think, but it's also truer than you think. I mean, you might as well roll that out into every single business in the civil service in the state of this country. But of course, we already have, haven't we? Let's get a voice note from Christopher.
Good morning, Mike. Looking forward to my dose of common sense. Obviously, Starmer hasn't got any common sense. As our new trade secretary is Miss Osmore, whose son was a drug dealer, and when questioned by a journalist, she threatened to smash the journalist's face in with a bat. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. You just reminded me of that. Kate Ossawall, that's right, Labour MP, threatened to smash a reporter's face with a bat, is now a trade envoy. Maybe she'll take the bat with her. Maybe that's the new policy. You know, hello, guys. I'm Kate. I've come from Britain. If you don't buy any of our stuff, I'm going to smash the place up with this baseball bat. And if you get in the way, I'll smash your face in as well. Apparently her son was sentenced to a community order in a drugs case in 2018, and she had to apologise to Parliament. That's your lot. This is Talk.
So I have two stores, one in Cobham and one in Wimbledon, and they were targeted by the same men. They came in armed with tools, cut through our security wires because all the bags are attached with security wires. They knew what they were doing, what they were looking for. We have, a security alarms. We've got panic buttons. We've pressed those. We've got amazing CCTV, which you can see, and yet the police just didn't come.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham. 7:25 is the time. We're here all the way through until 10 o'clock. Of course, Russell Quirk is in for Alex Phillips. Got this from Simon. Good morning, Mike. He says, I remember when DEI excuse me, was happening in the aviation sector. I knew this would end in disaster. And Bernie says the biggest people smuggling gang is here in the UK. It's called the Foreign Office and the Border Force. And on that story from Tunisia, Darren says in Birmingham, I can't believe our dumb-witted government are giving £5 million to Tunisia to try and persuade people not to leave there and to come here. It is unreal. I know. It is absolutely ridiculous, and they're also going to tell them, train them up and get them to speak English better in order for them not to come here. Makes absolutely no sense at all. Let's talk to David Mensa, though, Israeli government spokesman. Yesterday we saw, again, some terrible scenes coming out of Gaza where more hostages were released, but particularly when it came to the women hostages who were being released, surrounded by baying crowds of men dressed in Hamas militant outfits, covering their faces, wearing the green bandanas, brandishing AK-47s, manipulating all sorts of things. There were people with video cameras filming it. I mean, it is quite a disgusting sight. Benjamin Netanyahu reacted to it as well and refused to allow Palestinian prisoners to be released until they got an agreement from Hamas to basically stop mistreating the hostages as they are released, because it really was, as I say, a dreadful sight to see. Let's talk to David Mensa now. David, very good morning to you.
Good to be with you, Mike.
Thanks very much indeed for talking to us. It was quite awful sort of orchestrated scenes that we're seeing here as that person to the right of the picture is filming the hostage there. She's hopefully now in the arms of her loved ones, and she's free, and that could be only a good thing. But, you know, they're trying to make propaganda out of it. I mean, it really is quite disgusting, isn't it?
Yeah, quite horrible, quite shocking, and not a word from the women's rights organizations around the world. One of our hostages that came home yesterday is a woman called Alvel Yehud. She's a 29-year-old woman, was just in her home and was taken hostage. She was held for 482 days in Hamas captivity. And you know, I'm doing a lot of interviews on the BBC internationally. I tell you, Mike, you know, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they're a designated terrorist organization in the UK, in the US, in the UN, many other democratic nations. Their charter openly calls for the annihilation of Israel. They deliberately target our civilians in mass murder operations. So the question I just can't get my head around is why it is that the BBC refused to call Hamas what the UK government itself designates them as, terrorists. I wonder if the BBC would hesitate to call ISIS a terrorist organization. Why does Hamas, which has beheaded our people, taken our people hostage, these scenes yesterday were horrific, raped women, get different treatment?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me either, David. I mean, I was watching Laura Kunsberg's show last Sunday, and normally speaking, I think it was Sunday before actually, Laura Kunsberg is one of the less ridiculous BBC News hosts, you know, but she was doing the same thing, and every time she mentioned Hamas, she more or less sort of was at pains to point out, you know, an organisation which is prescribed by many countries, including Britain. And you kind of go, and she didn't even use the word a terrorist organisation, she said just prescribed. And I'm thinking, you know, apart from the fact that it's really bad journalism because you're using more words than you need to use to describe something which is very easy to describe, in my view, I just call them the terrorist organisations Hamas, or the Hamas terrorists. That's it. You don't need any other words. I find it extraordinary.
You know, maybe the BBC is comfortable with whitewashing a group that butchered 1,200 people on October 7th, including entire families and babies and Holocaust survivors.
Yeah.
So by refusing to call them what they are as terrorists, it's clear to us here in Israel that they are suggesting that there is in some way legitimacy in their methods. There can be no other explanation. Because if an organization stormed into London, massacred families, took Brits citizens hostage, would the BBC call them militants or terrorists? Does the BBC really believe that targeting civilians with rockets, suicide bombings and massacres is militancy or terrorism? So,
absolutely. And also some organisations here as well, and it may not be just limited to the BBC, were kind of referring to, in some ways, the Palestinian prisoners being released as some kind of equivalence, you know, that these are people that have been held hostage by the Israeli government. Well, no. And most of them are killers. Most of them are, at the very least, criminals, if they're not actual killers. And we know at least one of them, who was released yesterday, is responsible for the deaths of dozens of people.
Yeah, let me give you just one of them. You know, we swapped Alvel Yehud, who was a 29-year-old woman I told you about, from her home. Her own brother was murdered. Her partner is still being held captive. We swapped him for many terrorists, amongst them, and this is very painful for Israelis, but we need to get our hostages home, but amongst them was Mohammed Abu Warda. He murdered 45 civilians in the 90s.
Yeah.
He got 48 life sentences. He's never expressed remorse for his actions.
No.
The question we're asking ourselves here, with the BBC's refusal to call Hamas terrorists, they're simply emboldening extremism, they fuel anti-Semitism, and they create a false moral equivalence between a sovereign democratic country, Israel, in line with the UK, and a genocidal death cult. We're starting to wonder whose side they're actually on.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's a good and challenging point to make. I've got more bad news for you though on that front, because it was Holocaust Memorial Day the other day, and I don't know if you saw this particular report from ITV. This was very much castigated by all and sundry, and they did apologise for it in the end. But just take a look at this.
King Charles will become the first British head of state to visit Auschwitz-Birkenau later today as part of events to mark 80 years since the liberation of the Nazi death camp. 6 million people were killed in concentration camps during the Second World War, as well as millions of others because they were Polish, disabled, gay, or belonged to another ethnic group.
I mean, I had to watch that several times to understand that they deliberately removed the word Jew or Jewish people from that that report. I mean, I can't explain it, David.
Well, it's appeasement. Let's call it precisely what it is. Of course, Churchill called appeasement feeding the alligator and hoping it'll eat you last. This sort of extremism, this woke extremism, and let's call it what it is. It's Jew hatred, writing the Jews out from the worst crime of humanity in the history of mankind. It is anti-Semitism, but it's also appeasement. It's feeding, it's feeding the militant Islam for fear of offending them. You know, we're on the front line of this battle here in Israel. We wish to live in peace desperately, but we're facing jihadists. The only way is to wipe them off the face of the earth, and then we can move forward to a peaceful future for all the people in this region.
Absolutely.
As for ITV, it's just plainly pathetic.
Yeah, quite right. Finally, what's the next stage of the hostage release sort of schedule, if there is one?
So tomorrow, on Saturday, we have another 3 of our hostages coming out. That we're moving forward with the first tranche of the hostage releases, 33 of them to be released. Unfortunately, 25 of them are alive, which is great news. 7 of them are dead, unfortunately. We want to bring them all home. It's an open sore in our society here, but the government has a moral commitment. It has an unbreakable commitment to the people in this country to bring our home, although it comes at a very, very heavy price. Make no mistake.
Absolutely. David, we wish you luck with it all as ever. David Menser, Israeli government spokesman, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. This is, of course, the home of common sense. We will be covering that tomorrow when more hostages are released. We'll talk about it until they all come home, because it's such an important story. Coming up next, we've got Katie Amis, daughter of Sir David Amis. She's got lots to say about Prevent, about the problems that the Southport killer has highlighted in terms of the number of times that Prevent were referred to by people who thought he was a danger. Of course, David Amis, the MP, was killed by somebody else who was referred to Prevent on several occasions, who didn't similarly get treated as if he was a danger to society. We'll talk to her coming up after this on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:36. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through, of course, until 10 o'clock. Morning Mike says, Howard, as of the 1st of February, new rules for migrants, no benefits, no free clothes, no mobile phones, no accommodation. I guarantee that they would stop coming in short order. And on the subject of the Brexit referendum, Alan in Merseyside says, I will say it again, before we even think of having another referendum on the EU, we should stay out at the same length of time we were in, which I think was 47 years. That's only fair. Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point as well. 5th anniversary of Brexit, of course, today. We'll talk some more about that coming up. Right now, though, let's talk to Katie Amis, daughter, of course, of Sir David Amis, who was brutally murdered while he was still an MP for Southend, a man who was universally regarded as one of the best local MPs of all time, one of the best Tory MPs of all time. A wonderful father, a wonderful man, it would seem, to all the people who knew him. David's daughter, Katie, has been talking an awful lot about him recently because of the horrible business in the Southport story, the Southport killer. Because, of course, Prevent played a massive role in his death as well. Let's find out what she wants to say. Katie, very good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
Not at all. I mean, you've been very vocal in recent days and weeks since the trial of the man who I don't name actually on this show, the Southport killer.
Yeah, me neither.
I don't want to give him any credence, and similarly, I don't want to name the man that killed your father. But tell us what your concerns are, and tell us why you're speaking out now.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, obviously, my heartfelt condolences to the families of the little girls in Southport. And it's just unthinkable that we are in this situation again. The guy that did it in Southport was on the same monitoring scheme as my father, Prevent. And they had 3.5 years since what happened to my dad to do an investigation into it. And they repeatedly ignored my questions about doing one. And now we're in the same situation again. These aren't isolated incidents. We are seeing repeated failings of Prevent over and over again. The attacks in London Bridge, the attacks in Streatham, the friends that were attacked in a park, the London Bridge bomb that was detonated. It's just beyond stupidity that we are constantly having the same conversation. And thankfully, Southport is going to have an inquiry, and I'm so glad for those families that they get the opportunity to have one. But what about everybody else that doesn't have one? Unfortunately, I met with Yvette Cooper this morning, and I was presuming that she would say, well, yeah, of course we're going to do an inquiry for you because we're doing one immediately for Southport. She wasn't able to assure me of that at all. She basically said that because she wasn't Home Secretary at the time that it happened to my father, it's not as straightforward for her to say that we will get an inquiry, which doesn't make sense. No,
that's ridiculous because, you know, the Home Office is the Home Office, and we know that it's riddled with problems because not many parts of it work terribly well. And the Prevent programme has been set up for years and years and years. As you say, there are thousands of these people who Prevent are not properly monitoring and who Prevent have decided in their wisdom are not dangerous.
Yeah, it's just repeated failings time and time again. And until we do an inquiry into each individual case, we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of what's going wrong. So we're going to find ourselves in this situation time and time again. And the government can't pick and choose who they're going to help. But if they're going to help one set of people, they need to help everybody. So I don't accept the fact that because she wasn't Home Secretary at the time, we won't get an inquiry. That's not how it works. People have launched inquiries into previous government's actions. And that's
the Post Office inquiry for a start. The Post Office inquiry is about all sorts of different governments who are responsible for it. So that is completely a red herring, isn't it, to hide behind?
Absolutely. And, you know, I've been in tears because I just think the Conservatives wouldn't help me. I thought the Labour government would help me, but it doesn't seem like they are going to. I tried to take it through the court system. I've tried to launch an independent police complaint, which has just been completely ignored. It's like nobody wants to find out what went wrong, and I'm just asking why. What is it that happened that we aren't allowed to know as a family?
And why do you think they are so reticent to have that investigation and to find out what happened, or to tell you what was the problem?
I think it's going to embarrass them massively that it was such incompetence and it was a government scheme. And I think they just don't want to be embarrassed, but that's not good enough. Everybody wants to say that my dad was their friend.
Yeah.
But if you have a friend that was tragically killed like this, wouldn't you stand up for him and do what is right and fight for him? Because that is what he would do for them.
Yes.
So somebody just needs to stop being scared and just blow this thing open and find out what it is that is being hidden from us and the public, because people aren't safe right now. People are infiltrating, getting away from the system. In my dad's case, they took the guy out for a cup of coffee. He said he wasn't a terrorist and he went on his way.
Right.
He even said in court it was so easy to get away from the people that were questioning him because they just said what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
What kind of message does it send to other potential terrorists if your friend and colleague of 40 years that is a sitting MP is brutally killed and you won't even do an inquiry?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't. And also, what's it all about, Prevent? You know, at the end of the day, it's a voluntary organisation. You know, people, you know, I discovered this, that, you know, in the case of the Southport killer, you know, he didn't want to be investigated. He didn't really want to take part in the programme, so he didn't have to. And you're kind of going, well, what sort of system is that? You know, so what if somebody?
Well, what's the point of having it then?
Well, it's pointless. It's like a chocolate teapot, literally. I mean, you might as well just not have it at all.
Yeah, it's embarrassing, and for other potential terrorists to know that this is how easy it is to get away from us, they're just laughing at us, and we can't scratch our heads after these terrible acts have been committed. We need to be in front of it, and we need to be investigating all of the individual failings.
Yeah.
So until we do that, we're just going to be in a repeat of this situation. It's not difficult for them to get away with, you know, the questioning that they're having, because due to an admin error in my dad's case, it wasn't followed up with. Well, I don't call that an admin error. I call that a grave mistake that somebody lost their life for.
Yeah.
And we need to investigate who did that, why they did it, and have some kind of accountability
Absolutely.
for it.
Dereliction of duty, you might say, in some cases. Well, listen, Katie, anything we can do to help you, do let us know, and we'll keep trying to push your requests and your agenda forward as much as we can. Anybody you want us to talk to, we'll get them on, and we'll put them to the sword, as it were, and let's try and see if we can get them to actually move on this, because this affects everyone. I mean, you know, because it's you obviously are a very brave woman talking about this. You've had a terrible tragedy in your family which should never have happened, you know, and it will happen to other people, and that's what we need to stop, isn't it?
And the problem is, I've only got this far because I have a platform.
Yeah.
If my dad wasn't Sir David Amos, I wouldn't have even been able to get as far as I have. I've wasted tens of thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
I've spoken personally to the Conservative leaders, to the Labour leaders. Other people don't have that kind of access. And so if I can only get this far, imagine how far anybody else can get with this. And it's just not fair, because I think the politicians are forgetting that they work for us.
Exactly.
They need to have our best interests at heart. So something needs to change, and I'm not accepting no for an answer, and I will fight until the end, and I will get the answers that I deserve for my dad.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. And anything, as I say, we can do, Katie, we'll be very happy to do it. Good to talk to you, and good luck. Thank you very much indeed. Katie Amos, daughter of Sir David Amos, who was so terrible. What a waste of a life. I mean, the guy was right in the middle of his life, right in the prime of his life. He was doing a great job for his constituents in Southend, and as Katie says, everybody loved him. Everybody wanted to be his friend. Well, it's time they did something, and it's time they looked into Prevent and why it is so useless and why it is such a hopeless organisation, despite what my Lord Carlisle told me the other week. This is Talk. Coming up, we're going to talk about the BBC. We've got some more gaffes for you as well, because it is, after all, Gaff Friday.
the emotional terrorism that Hamas keeps doing. We don't know anything, and we won't know anything until there is another release of three men on Saturday, and no one knows who they are and who is going to be released. And we are waiting for the call. We are waiting for this call.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:49. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. We're talking about a great many things, including the diversity problem, which was highlighted by Donald Trump yesterday. We're going to have a gaffe for you in a moment. We're going to speak to our friend formerly at the BBC, John Mayer, about Russell Brand. That's coming up in a minute. Mark from Selby says this: Mike, when people say to me that DEI is vital, I argue back to them that the analogy is that if they or their children need an operation on their eyes or their brain, would they want the person doing the operation to be the most qualified on their ability or the one who ticks a diversity box? Guess which one they choose. And Pete says, I'm disgusted by our Prime Minister's blatant lies on a variety of topics, but his attitude to Trump takes the biscuit. I'd respect him more if he stuck to his guns, and if he doesn't like him, say so. Don't grovel. Well, too late for that, I'm afraid. Let's get a voice note from Liam.
Good morning, Mike. Liam in Folkestone. Now, yesterday you said that £4 million per year is spent on clothes for those illegally crossing the channel. Well, back a couple of years ago, in just 5 months, they spent £40,000 on Domino's Pizza. Yeah, 40,000. I put in a Freedom of Information request to the Home Office to ask how are they being fed. They've got a private company, and it wouldn't be in the public interest to let you know. I mean, come on. They'd be spending far more than £4 million on food for them. Anyway, have a great weekend, mate. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Liam. Yeah, absolutely right. Home Office spent $39,000 of taxpayers' cash on pizzas for hungry Channel migrants, and that's before they've given them a new puffer jacket because they might be a bit cold and wet for the trip. Marvellous, isn't it? Here's a nice piece of I don't know. What would you give them? You know, the Four Seasons, perhaps, or you know, American Hot. Oh, that's got salami on it. Probably don't want that. Let's get a gaff. Here's Jeremy Kyle.
Rose, hello.
Hello.
Right, Rose, come on, sound a little bit happier.
No, I'm fine. I'm watching Jeremy Kyle and I'm thinking about my question.
Right, have you got me on the television while you're speaking to me?
No, I've got Jeremy Kyle on.
I am Jeremy Kyle.
Well, you're talking to somebody else. You're talking to Peter.
No, I'm talking to... yeah, but you see, there's a delay. Turn the radio or television off because I can hear it.
Right, OK.
Turn it off before you come back to the phone. Oh, God.
It's off. Sorry.
That used to happen a lot more than it does now, actually. I think people have more got used to the sort of the way the system works. But there we are. Let's talk to John Mayer, ex-BBC producer, because a big piece of the Mail today. BBC staff were too frightened to speak up about Russell Brand because he always got his way. Bosses have apologised amid the claims of rape, assault and emotional abuse that was supposedly carried out by Russell Brand when he was working at the BBC. There were claims of him exposing himself, having sex in a toilet, putting his fingers down someone's trousers and using a BBC car to drive a 16-year-old from the school that she was in to his house. You know, all courtesy of Her Majesty's or His Majesty's British Broadcasting Corporation. John Mayer is here. Very good morning to you, John.
Oh, Mike, we meet again on the same subject?
We do. I mean, it beggars belief, some of this stuff, doesn't it? I mean, you've worked inside the business more than I have. How is it possible that so many of these things that Russell Brand did were not even worthy of him being sort of upbraided for or was called in to see somebody and told, you know, you can't behave like this? You know, why didn't it happen?
Mike, look, to appear on television or to appear even on the radio or even on talk, you need a massive ego to put yourself in front of a camera.
You always say that. I don't have a massive ego. It's not true.
Oh, well, I leave that for others to judge, Mike, whether you have or have not. And with that massive ego comes faults. What do we want our TV presenters to be? Do we want to be total vanilla? Do we want to be?
Well, I prefer it if they didn't expose themselves to people or have sex in the toilet in the office. That's probably two things I'd suggest. Probably not a great start.
And I'm delighted to see the BBC's finally got a system that actually investigates things and brings it out to the public. But there is this question: what do you want them to be? And I mean, something I think is fascinating is there's a shooting gallery with TV presenters now. They about one a week get shot down. Is that a good thing? Is that a healthy thing in our society? The tabloid press is like fox hunting. They just go after something until.
Well, I don't think it's the tabloid press that are going after Russell Brand. It's the police, actually. The police are investigating some of the things that he's been doing, right? And at the end of the day,
they're taking a while on that, aren't they?
Well, yeah, but it's a police investigation. It's nothing to do with the tabloid press. I think it was the Sunday Times that first broke the story in Channel 4. So it's nothing to do with the tabloid press. I think you'll find.
Well, the Go Compare man this week, and even the poor Bishop of Liverpool.
Well, there are people that tell stories about the way that people behave. Here's a clue: don't behave badly, and nobody will tell stories about you behaving badly.
That's true, but none of us are perfect. We have to realise.
Well, I may not be perfect, but I don't expose myself to the staff, and I don't have sex in the toilets. Does that make me, an extraordinarily, brilliantly talented presenter because I'm the only one that doesn't do it?
Look, with ego comes flaws, and you have to accept that.
No, I don't. I don't have to accept it. Absolute rubbish. You can have a big ego, and you can be in trouble for speaking to people badly, and you can be taken into to an office by HR and told you shouldn't speak to people like that. But this is altogether different. He's taking a BBC car to pick up a 16-year-old girl from a school to bring her to his house, presumably for nefarious purposes.
That one wasn't proven, as you know.
It wasn't proven.
The report actually wasn't proven.
Oh, so you're now defending Russell Brand?
No, I'm not defending Russell.
Because he's got a big ego.
Report. No, I'm defending the report which says that the car isn't proven. They've got no way of proving that.
What they said, what they said was they couldn't find any evidence that any BBC staff had any knowledge that he had inappropriate engagement with competition winners. Well, I don't believe that.
Well,
everybody knows where cars go. We have investigations in all sorts of places in news organisations. If you want to know who's ordered a car, you can easily find out where it was ordered from, who ordered it, where it went from, and where it went to. It's not difficult, is it?
Peter Johnson, who wrote this report, said he can find no proof of that. But he did. Look, the BBC has actually finally found a system of investigating things like that and doing it out in the open, as it absolutely should. But the basic question: what do you want your TV presenters to be? Do you want nuns and vicars presenting TV?
Well, that's the show. That's the show for Channel 5, by the sounds of it. Nuns and vicars. Go put it out about 10 o'clock on a Friday night when people come back from the pub. I'm sorry to keep giving you these ideas that can make you some money. No, listen. I take your point, but you can't surely equate people having a big ego with people misbehaving and being sexually aggressive and being basically overbearing, particularly to younger staff. That's not acceptable. And even if it was acceptable in 1965, it hasn't been acceptable in the commercial business for a very long time.
Mike, I'm sure that if we took some of your staff into a darkened room, they may have secrets.
Listen, that's what you do at the BBC. We don't do that here.
All right. No.
We don't take people into darkened rooms. That's Hugh Edwards' behaviour, that. Has he paid back his money yet, by the way, Hugh Edwards?
No, he hasn't, and I think that's deplorable.
It is.
Absolutely deplorable. The BBC should sue him for that. But, who's going to be next week's target? Choose your presenter to shoot down.
I don't particularly want to shoot anybody down, but I think if people are reported to be misbehaving by people who they work with, then I think that's a valid use of people's time. And if the BBC can't control their presenters, then they need to get better at doing that.
Is it only BBC presenters, you think?
No, it's not. There's ITV presenters. There's all sorts of people who are in trouble all of the time.
Who misbehave? Why do we never hear about the ITV presenters?
Well, you do. Well, I think you heard about Philip Schofield quite a lot, didn't you?
You did, but only Philip Schofield so far. Well,
maybe he's the only one. I don't know.
Look, I mean, Mike, people like you take any opportunity to bash the BBC.
That's not true.
Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong.
Yeah, I've never been wrong. That's also incorrect.
The BBC's in a precarious position. The licence fee is coming up, and perhaps we'll have a discussion about that soon.
Well, here's an idea for you. Sky News have just announced that because of the ridiculous expense of being on linear television, they're withdrawing from it. Maybe the BBC should do the same thing.
Sky News are coming off linear television like you.
Yeah.
Are they going on to YouTube like you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, well, they're going digital. We call it going digital, John. It's not just YouTube. YouTube is a very important part of what we do. Yeah. But you might have heard of something called a smart TV. I know you probably don't have a smart TV because you're not smart enough. But if you did have a smart TV, you'd be able to watch us on it because there's an app which you can see, which is called Talk. Right? So there's many myriad ways. You can also watch us on Amazon Prime. And there's many myriad ways you can watch us. And so it's not simply going on YouTube, and that's what they're going to do.
Look, I mean, I thought Sky was guaranteed to exist for 10 years.
No. Well, you've obviously not been reading the news, have you?
I haven't. I'm not talking. But look, presenters' ego problems.
Just don't finish the sentence.
The presenters' ego problems. You have to accept that,
No,
you're not
I don't mind people having an ego. I don't accept that people should be allowed to misbehave and do whatever they like. That's not what you do.
And I agree with you. And if they misbehave, they should be slapped on the wrist and told they have. And Russell Brand
was never slapped on the wrist and was never controlled, and so he did what he liked.
People thought he had a direct line to the controller radio too. And she, of course, in this report says she doesn't remember some of these things.
Well, the BBC have apologised, haven't they, for this
they have indeed.
So they must have thought they got something wrong.
Well, they've now got a system to do it.
So they must have admitted they got something wrong, didn't they? They got it wrong.
They have, and they never admitted on Hugh Edwards. There's never been a proper investigation into Hugh Edwards. From the BBC.
Exactly right. So they're still getting that wrong. Listen, we've got to run. John, thanks very much indeed for the lesson in how not to know anything about television. This is Talk.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, Oifamo slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the process, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God...
Across the UK, on on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 2 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham. This, of course, is the home of common sense. It's the one place where you hear it. Donald Trump is now talking about common sense. He mentioned it in his press conference yesterday in Washington, D.C., in the White House press briefing room. Also, even the Labour government is starting to use the phrase common sense. They haven't got much of it, but it's a good start, at least. This is a guy, James Murray, was it? It was on BBC Question Time last night, who actually used the phrase common sense when he was talking about the DEI policies of this government. Donald Trump, however, was a slightly more, shall we say, aggressive critic of DEI. And here he is describing some of the things that have been done in recruitment in America, particularly recruiting air traffic controllers. Have a listen to this.
The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? Absolutely incredible stuff, but it's true, and we will continue to monitor that story, of course, as it develops throughout the course of the day. I think the black boxes have now been recovered from the Potomac River, and so investigators will be looking into what could have possibly happened, how it could have been even possible for a helicopter, a Black Hawk helicopter, a military helicopter, to fly what appears to be into the back of a commercial airliner as it was coming into land just 400 feet from the runway. Absolutely extraordinary. Tragically, 67 people lost their lives, and America obviously in mourning for that in the day today. We'll bring you up to date on that as soon as we can. Coming up in this hour, though, we're going to speak to Jerome Starkey, who's the Sun's defence correspondent, of course, defence editor, actually, I should say. He's on the front page of the Sun today because Vladimir Putin has issued an arrest warrant for him. We'll find out what that's all about. Also, we'll continue to have our conversations about the growth agenda. Front page of the Daily Mail. It looks like Keir Starmer's been told to prove his growth agenda isn't all hot air, which it clearly is. Rachel Reeves, of course, still lying about her CV, still lying about the growth that she's going to create by putting a third runway into Heathrow, which isn't going to happen. It's all going on. Ryan Savey's here as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Morning Glory. It's Friday. Let's get it on. 5 minutes past 8, welcome to the home of common sense, and a big welcome on this Friday before the big weekend to Jerome Starkey, who's on the front page of the paper, not for the first time, of course, but the headline says, "How Vladdy dare you? Russian arrest warrant issued for Sunman Starkey." And yesterday, when this news came out, Jerome put a little tweet out saying it's nice to be wanted. It's probably not as nice as you might like it to be, Jerome, but very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. This is a court order, isn't it, that's been issued because of the coverage that you have done in Ukraine, putting your life in the hands of some very reliable people in the Ukraine side of the battle, but also putting your life on the line for the paper and for everybody else. Tell us what's going on.
Well, in essence, this is a court which has issued, or rather has ordered my arrest and detention. It's a Russian court in Kursk, and they have charged me in absentia with the crime of crossing the state border of the Russian Federation illegally. Now, that's because, as you mentioned, in August, I travelled into occupied Kursk. That was the pocket of land which Ukraine captured in that extraordinary lightning offensive. They seized Russian soil for the first time in the conflict. Indeed, you know, the first time Russia had sort of ceded sovereign soil like that since the end of the Second World War. So it was a huge blow to Russia and a really important opportunity for journalists like us to try and report on what was happening. It was really hard to get there, understandably. This was a part of the world that Russia desperately wanted to win back. The skies were saturated with drones. It was an active war zone, but we did manage to get in with Ukraine's armed forces, not for very long, but it gave us a chance to see and to speak to, crucially, a handful of Russians who'd been left behind. So Russian citizens who, that was the first time I'd spoken to any Russian citizens about this conflict in Russia since Vladimir Putin.
And what did they have to say?
Well, the thing that really struck me was how indifferent they'd been to this conflict. That was the people I spoke to lived just a few miles from the Ukrainian frontier. This war had been raging right next door to them for 2.5 years at the time that I spoke to them, and yet their lives, in many ways understandably, but also in many ways utterly shockingly, had just carried on as normal whilst this slaughter was waged in their name. Because Vladimir Putin claims he is defending Russians and Russia's interests. Obviously, it had come to them with a horrible shock, and most people had fled this town of Suja that we made it into. But as I said, there were a handful who'd been left behind.
Yeah, and so how will this affect you? Well, I mean, knowing you as I do, I imagine you probably won't affect you at all. You'll just continue to do what you've always done.
I will continue to do what I've always done, 100%. It's hard. You cannot see this move by the Russian court as anything but an attempt to intimidate journalists like me who report on the conflict. And as a matter of principle, I will not be cowed, and I will go back to Ukraine, certainly, and I will continue to report on this war. It's a real indictment, I think, ultimately, of the Russian system. It's a sham justice system where, the Russian law has been totally undermined by decades of political judgments. We saw it last year with my colleague Evan Gershkovich, who spent well over a year, 15 or 16 months in prison on totally trumped-up spying charges. Again, just another Russian attempt to silence and intimidate journalists who are doing their job, shedding light on difficult subjects, and subjects which Vladimir Putin would rather the world didn't hear about.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, we wish you well, Jerome. We look forward to your next report from the war zone, and thank you very much indeed for all the stuff you do, and we'll see you soon. Jerome Starkey, the defence editor of The Sun, who's now wanted, effectively, by the Russian Federation for crimes against the truth. They don't like the truth much in Russia. We love it here at Talk. And, of course, we're going to talk some more truth with Ryan Saby, Deputy Political Editor of the newspaper The Sun. Ryan, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
5th anniversary of Brexit. Nigel Farage says he's not even sure Boris Johnson really had his heart in it in the first place. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it does seem like that. Nigel Farage is going to be out sort of campaigning at rallies today, and I think one of those key messages that he's trying to get is look, Nigel Farage is pleased, obviously, that the Brexit Day happened 5 years ago, but how the Conservative Party and now this government, are they really going to seize the benefits of that? He looks back to the time of Boris. He didn't really massively take advantage of it. And I think the problem now for people like Nigel Farage, it seems that reset moment that Keir Starmer is talking about getting closer ties to Brussels, is just going to bring us closer and closer. So I think people from Nigel Farage's side of the argument are just going to see that maybe the next few months and years as a betrayal of what happened back in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely right. Growth very much still the order of the day on the front pages this morning. A piece in the Mail from Daniel Hannan basically saying that Britain has now elevated net zero over democracy. Ed Miliband, who some people thought was going to resign this week because apparently it now turns out he told the Cabinet on Tuesday that basically he didn't think a third runway at Heathrow was in any way compatible with their net zero commitments. But now, after a court case in Scotland has ruled that the Tories were unlawfully giving the go-ahead and the green light to some oil and gas exploration, the Prime Minister is being told, show us you actually mean business and resurrect these oil and gas licences and let's actually start getting some proper growth in the North Sea.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think this will be a moment when it comes to this issue of oil and gas for Sir Keir Starmer to show some backbone. We had that big speech from Rachel Reeves early in the week where she said the government's #1 mission was to grow the economy. We heard also from Sir Keir Starmer saying that every single decision made in government has to be seen through this prism of growth. So I think lots of people are looking to the next steps from the government. They'll be reading that court judgment and going through that line by line. But I think many people, if Keir Starmer really means growth, he's really got to act.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Rachel Reeves has spent all week telling us about how, you know, everything seems to rebound around growth. Maybe the third runway in Heathrow will be built. Maybe it won't. But even if it is, it will be 25 years away. A railway line coming up somewhere between Oxford and Cambridge, running past Milton Keynes. You know, it's all terribly sort of, you know, eager, and it looks good on paper, perhaps, but it's not really ever going to happen. And if it does happen, it's going to be a very long time away.
And I think that's the trouble. This government could walk into very, very, very quickly. You go back to before the election, it was all going to be landed sort of milk and honey, and people were going to be feeling better. In this Parliament, you had Jonathan Reynolds this week saying that people will feel better off this year, but will people be sort of substantially feeling better off? And all these big projects, whether it's Heathrow, Gatwick, Luton, the East West Rail, as you say, these things could be the best part of 2 decades away. And is this government actually going to transform people's lives, make them feel better off? It's all very much up in the air, and people say it can't happen quick enough, and it's not likely to happen within the next few years, just because these projects. And we know what happens when people put planning applications into this country, and we've seen that we know about the government's their endeavours to try and make things happen, but they get held up in the courts and judicial reviews. Nothing tends to get off the ground, so it really will show this government's mettle whether they're actually going to sort of push through with what they say.
Well, that's it. I mean, even Sadiq Khan says he's going to challenge the government in the court. So, I mean, what chance have they got of getting it past him? Because he's the mayor of London. And that's before you even get started with the green groups and the environmentalists and all the kind of, the badger lovers and the newt lovers and the bat brigade.
Yeah, no, that's right. And we had Sir Sadiq Khan saying that he will use every tool within the toolkit to actually try and stop this third runway. He just doesn't think the extra capacity, the extra flights will do anything to improve the environment in and around London. So you can see, and on top of that, you've got Ed Miliband, who says that if the Heathrow runway will go ahead, that it has to be within those carbon budgets. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there for Ed Miliband to say, well, hang on a minute. You say that it's got to, meet our sort of net zero targets, and it doesn't look like it is. So there are rows on the horizon in government, even though Ed Miliband has said he will not walk away from cabinet. So let's just watch this space on that.
Absolutely. Well, you can always use David Lammy's private jet, I suppose, if they get the third runway up and running. He's apparently run up a bill, according to Guido today, of around about £1 million already.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the Foreign Secretary does travel around a hell of a lot more so than other ministers, but cast your mind back to before the election, and there was lots of calls from shadow cabinet ministers, Labour MPs, about the use of Conservative ministers going around the world and how they wouldn't travel on private jets themselves. And you fast forward to a year or so, and they're doing exactly the same. Now, I think a lot of people don't mind the Prime Minister and senior ministers getting on planes, but I think it's when you say one thing in opposition and then doing another thing in government, I think that's what that sparks that hypocrisy row. Also, you say he flies around a lot more than other ministers. I'm not sure he flies around more than the Prime Minister. So, I mean, I wonder what the Prime Minister's bill is. Can you find that out for us as well? Yeah, no, I'm sure we possibly can. We often travel with them, so to cover their every move. You just look at the trips that the Foreign Secretary has been on. He went to the Chagos Islands to Samoa, where I was covering it. He's been to NATO. He's pretty much out the country every single week.
He was in Sudan the other day, banging on about how important Sudan was, to which everyone went, well, why? You've got plenty of other things to fix, thanks.
Yeah, no, exactly. And his diary is pretty packed. But I think one thing that David Lammy really has to try and sort of bridge is that relationship with America. We've obviously got Lord Mandelson going in there as ambassador. And I think the big thing on the horizon on that side will be that free trade agreement that Britain sort of desperately wants.
Absolutely. More trouble at home for Starmer, though. The Attorney General on the front page of the Times this morning, that's Lord Hermer, who's already had to declare that, he does have conflicts of interest with the government, and he does sometimes have to recuse himself, that is to take himself away from the conversations about, giving government advice. In the Times this morning today, he's facing even more criticism from inside the Cabinet, people saying that he's obstructing government because he's more concerned about, judicial reviews and lawsuits and all the rest of it. So, I mean, it's looking more and more like he can't really do the job, this guy.
Yeah, no, I think maybe if you haven't been in politics before and you get brought in, that maybe you're just getting used to the role, and you may be used to doing different things. But I think the trouble is, ministers want to make decisions pretty quickly, and I think if lawyers are putting obstacles and hurdles in the way, it's become a deep sense of frustration for ministers in all departments. So I think that is probably one to watch, especially if it comes to Lord Hermer actually holding up big decisions.
Yeah, I'm looking at possibly before the end of March for this one to depart these shores.
Yeah, no. I think the one thing with Lord Hermer, he's extremely close to Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
So you just wonder whether all of this is done with the behest of Sir Keir Starmer. But don't forget, it's the lawyers that offer the advice, and it's advisors that advise, and it's the ministers to make the decisions. So let's also keep an eye on the ministers and making sure they're making the right decisions.
Yeah, absolutely right. Good to talk to you, Ryan Sabey. Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Political Editor, of course, at The Sun. We've got plenty going on. We're going to talk about Brexit throughout the show. Obviously, it's 5th anniversary today. Let's get a voice note from Elle.
I can't believe the BBC guy. I mean, every time I hear him, the stuff he comes out with and thinks it's acceptable, unbelievable. The poor Bishop. Good God, the lot of them, he defends all of them, and he actually genuinely thinks that they're not doing anything wrong.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? Here's another one from Tracy in Staffordshire. Mike, has the moral compass of your last guest moved so far that he honestly thinks it's OK for the talent to be morally corrupt, and he blames the press? If it wasn't for you giving him what for, it would be deeply depressing. Absolutely right. Morning, Mike, says Graham, down in Birmingham. Yvette Cooper is now saying Labour will smash the gangs on the continent to prevent illegals making the Channel crossing. Labour couldn't even smash the gangs in Bradford and Rotherham, and they are on our doorstep. It's a very good point. And finally, one from John. If a survey on Brexit was done outside of London, you would find that most people would vote to leave again. I agree with that. I don't ever believe most of the surveys that are done, particularly by YouGov. And let's not forget, before the Brexit referendum in 2016, everybody said, oh yeah, we're going to vote to stay. Definitely no chance of leaving the European Union. Nobody wants to do that. That would be stupid, wouldn't it? Coming up, we're going to discuss that, plus many, many other things. This is Talk.
as for whatever government comes after this woeful administration, if it's reform, they won't do the third runway either. So I just can't see this actually being any kind of answer to this country's economic woes. And as you say, the problem is that for all the fine words and, a load of blah, really, that she was giving us today, in the end, she's still taxing everybody to the hilt. She's still making it harder and more expensive to employ people.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 23 minutes past 8. Brian says, Mike, what a brilliant takedown of that dithering idiot mayor. He's clueless, clearly part of the problem at the BBC. And Mike, this ex-producer's defence of the Beeb is hilarious. He's in denial. His head must be stuck up the back entrance to Broadcasting House. Very possibly so. John Mayer defending the revolting Bland because of his ego is comedy gold, says Glyn. Yeah, it really is. Let's get a gaff because it is Friday. This is Ian Duncan Smith appearing on Julie Hartley-Brewer's show.
Channel migrants to buy them new clothes and shoes when they arrive here. £3,000 a day. We're told that £3 million cost over the last recent years is good value for money.
I, by the way, misread your message to me to say you were going to discuss this. When you wrote Channel, I thought, oh, Chanel. And I thought what we were giving them was Chanel clothes.
Or Chanel perfume, indeed, very possibly so. Julie Hartley-Brewer's column in The Sun today, of course, you can find it there, where she's wearing that, she's showing that picture of her at the Brexit night celebration in Parliament Square. If you were there, you'll remember it forever. She was wearing a Union Jack dress, looking very fabulous. Let's talk to Rupert Lowe, Reform MP, of course, from Great Yarmouth. Rupert, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well. It doesn't seem like 5 years ago, really. I was at a party. I didn't make it to the Parliament Square party because I couldn't get there, basically. I couldn't get near enough to it because I left the pub that I was in quite late. But I did make it to a party with Nigel Farage and several other people. You may have been there as well, somewhere in Piccadilly. And I was just saying earlier to another guest that it was a great moment. It felt as though something had changed in Britain, something had really, there was a new beginning. It was a watershed moment. All of those, phrases. And I was really feeling quite optimistic when I walked out of there, got in a cab and went home. And then suddenly it all kind of disappeared in the morass of COVID.
Well, I think the most significant date, Mike, was June 2016, when the Democratic majority of 17.4 million people voted to leave the EU, despite being recommended by our great establishment to remain. And the problem we had is it then took, as you know, 4 years before we actually finally left. So I celebrated twice, really. Once when we thought we'd left, and then once when we actually did leave in 2020.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in cooperating nation states. I think that's what's made Europe great. And the post-war plan to create a sort of socialist Europe bound together largely to stop Germany declaring war on France and France declaring war on Germany didn't suit the British. As you know, we were always being outvoted by this qualified majority voting, which was a large part of the EU's constitution. And to get out of that, it's given us control of our own borders, it's given us potentially control of our own trade. And actually, you know what, Mike, although we don't get the truth, we should have done so much better if we'd had a government that actually wanted Brexit. We could be by now booming, and we could be way ahead of Donald Trump and what's happening in the US. But the truth is that our establishment, the Uni Party, as I call them, is responsible for holding us back. But despite that, our trade with the world has grown, with countries like Kazakhstan, for instance. Nobody talks about it, but quietly, Britain's doing very well. The problem we've now got is we have a Labour government that wants to centrally plan everything. So rather than allowing the individual companies and entrepreneurs to decide where we take the economy, Rachel Reeves wants to try what the communists tried, to centrally plan everything, and she will cause us a big problem. But at least we have control of our own country, our own borders, our own trade. We can make the decisions, and once Reform wins the election, we can hopefully watch with admiration what's been happening in America and to a large extent replicate it and cut free the potential of this fantastic country.
True enough. I mean, the funny thing is, despite the fact that our own economy isn't doing brilliantly, it's still doing better than Germany's, it's still doing better than France, it's still doing better than the bulk of Europe, and has been doing so for quite some time, certainly since we left the European Union. But I mean, Nigel Farage...
Well, Mike, that's an incredibly important point. I mean, Germany, her economy is really struggling.
Yeah.
Politically, she's obviously now moving radically to the right. I think France is bust, and ultimately, she leveraged off Germany. That's why she insisted that Germany join the euro at the time. Germany actually wanted to maintain the Deutschmark. And actually, Germany then got the benefit of a weak Deutschmark because she was part of this what I call homunculus-like Europe.
Yeah.
So I think now Germany's economy is struggling, and if you look at what Donald Trump's going to do, he's very fixated on two things: trade, and Germany, France and Europe have a huge trade surplus with America, largely because they have a protectionist approach to life. So Donald Trump doesn't like that, and I think he's going to exact a lot of revenge on those people who don't have fair trade practices with the US. And obviously the second thing he's going to be quite focused on, I think, is how much people spend to ensure global peace, which, as we know, America has paid probably more than anybody for that. Yeah. Germany and France have probably not paid enough. So I think Europe's not only lost our contribution to the EU, which is rapidly diminishing, it's virtually gone. There's a few trail payments to pay. I personally wouldn't have paid them, but that's what was agreed.
Yeah.
And she's basically got all the forces against her, which helped her. So, as in Star Wars terms, the Force is not with her.
No, indeed. And in fact, I mean, as I say, what I was about to say was that Nigel Farage has said in a couple of the pieces he's written today in the papers that he's starting to think now that Boris Johnson's heart was never really in leaving the European Union, because he sort of did it as a halfway house job. Northern Ireland got left out of it. You and I have spoken about that many times. And it was kind of left to its own devices to some extent. And Northern Ireland sort of still isn't really sorted out. And we know Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves want to go back to having closer ties with the EU.
Yeah, just at the time when we should be aligning ourselves with the Anglo-Saxon world, which is going to be having a much freer trade and much more entrepreneurial structure. I mean, talking about Boris upsets me, Mike. I mean, he was an abject failure. I think the guy is fundamentally a journalist. I think his attention span can't cope with a week or more than a week. And if you look at what he presided over, he said he'd cut immigration. He presided over the huge growth of this,
it went up
both
massively
legal and illegal migration.
Yeah.
And then he allowed his wife free rein on the green issues, which again he'd come out against in the past. So read his articles from the past; they're quite sound. But watch what he did when he was in power with an 80-seat majority. And as I say to most Tories who remarkably are still on some occasions loyal to the Tory party, I asked them what did Boris Johnson do with an 80-seat majority, and the answer, Mike, is diddly squat. Or absolute diddly
And that's
squat,
the problem. I mean, there are
it.
still plenty of Conservative voters who think he did a brilliant job. And there were some things that he was very good at, but I think his legacy will be that, he got Brexit done, but not quite.
But he didn't, because as you quite rightly say, we had the Northern Ireland Protocol, which we hated, which morphed into the Windsor Agreement, which again, Rishi sort of heralded, but actually was worse than the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Yeah.
And what we did, we allowed the border to be put down the Irish Sea, and we allowed the Act of Union to be undermined. So I don't think we did Brexit well. But even so, we still now control our own borders. We were able, even though I disagreed with this wretched rollout of the untested COVID jab, as you know, and we had a debate in Parliament about that the other day, about the MHRA. We still had the power to make decisions for ourselves, and we still have that power now. You don't have that power if you're part of this, huge amalgam of paralysis, which is controlled by the European Commission, which is an unelected body.
Yeah, indeed, as is the ECHR, which is the other problem.
ECHR, HRA, Equalities Act, you name it, Mike. When we win the election, we have to have the Great Repeal Act followed by national restoration. That's what we need.
Right. Well, I look forward to that day coming, Rupert. Thank you very much indeed. Rupert Lowe, Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, there talking about the Brexit referendum, and also the day, of course, of that time 5 years ago when we were supposed to physically leave the European Union, which we did. But we'd had that terrible 2019, if you remember, where basically nothing happened. It was a complete stalemate before Boris Johnson won the election in December. 0344 499 1000. Gina in Warwick says, my husband inadvertently turned BBC News on for a brief time yesterday. I noticed that they are now saying diversity, equal opportunity and inclusion. They said this several times and in each case omitted the word equity. I just wondered what you make of this. Interesting. I don't know, Gina. I mean, maybe it's because they don't think equity means anything to anyone, and so therefore they've had to kind of extrapolate it and say equal opportunity rather than equity. Because I'm not sure equity does mean equal opportunity. It might mean that to some people, but it might mean something else to other people. Let's get a voice note from Brian.
Morning, Mike. Brian from Southend. Just listening to that dithering idiot you keep having on from the BBC or ex-BBC bloke. Maybe you should tell him, people will go after paedophiles and sex cases and just perverts, no matter where or what establishment they work in. And we don't just have to accept it, whether they got big egos or not.
Absolutely right. It's a completely ludicrous argument. Well, because talented people are supposed to have big egos, therefore they can do whatever they want. No. I'm afraid not. Not on my watch. Absolutely wrong. What an eloquent, strong young woman Katie Amis is, says Nicola from Norfolk. Her father would be very proud. Keep going, Katie. The ordinary people of this country are behind you. And Joanna from Salisbury says something similar. Right, well done, Katie Amis, for standing up despite her pain. She is her father's daughter, fighting the unjust. She speaks for all the nightmares, including the rape gangs. Where are all of our human rights to be safe? Well, you wonder where these human rights lawyers are, don't you, whenever you see cases like this? They don't really want to know anything bad about anybody from any ethnic minority. They only want to represent them and get free legal aid money from the state. They don't ever want to criticise them. That would be wrong, because that would be right-wing, wouldn't it? Absolutely ridiculous. It's 8:35. Coming up, we're going to talk a little bit more about shoplifting, which has become the blight of this nation. So much of it going on now. I think they said something like 55,000 episodes a day, is it? Or 55,000 a week? I can't remember. That was yesterday's story. Today we're going to talk to the Co-op Director of Campaigns. We're going to find out what they can do about shoplifting and the crisis that this nation faces. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:37. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. 4 glorious hours, of course, of what can only be described as the home of common sense, the greatest breakfast show in the existence of the world. And I don't say that with any great big sign of an ego. It just happens to be true. David Lammy is having a laugh at our expense, says Margaret, taking us all for mugs. It has to stop. Enough is enough. Giving our money away to Tunisia. Why? She says. And also one here from Alan in Middlesbrough. Pretty obvious that David Private Jet Lammy hasn't bothered attending his GCSE geography night class lessons. He does realise that Tunisia is not the other side of the English Channel, and the boats are not coming here via the Med and the Atlantic. It's a very good point. This is on the news, of course, that we broke this morning, that Tunisia is going to be in receipt of £5 million, and the plan is to give this money to the Tunisian government so that they can teach Tunisian people how to speak English better, with the view that they won't want to come to Britain if they've learned how to speak English better. I don't really quite understand the logic there. Why would that be the case? Surely if they learned to speak English better, it would be more likely that they would want to come to Britain to use their newly found skills to speak good English. Absolute madness, isn't it? Let's talk to Paul Gerard, who's Co-op's Director of Campaigns and Public Affairs. Paul, very good morning to you.
Thank you.
We saw terrible data this week that shoplifting has risen by 23% to something like nearly 500,000 offences a year. I think we've seen in the past footage from various different co-op branches around the country where, you know, there is plenty of CCTV. People are just coming in, sort of literally filling up bins and baskets and walking out with the stuff. I mean, it really is a massive problem now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about this, as you know, Mike, for a number of years, and certainly today, in our 2,500 co-op shops around the country, we'll have 1,000 incidents of crime.
Yeah.
120 plus of my colleagues will be seriously abused or threatened, and 3 or 4 of my colleagues will be violently attacked, very often with a weapon. And what's behind this isn't people who are struggling to make ends meet. It's organised crime gangs who are targeting food retail, not just a co-op, or all stores, in order to make money. And I speak as someone who spent a decade in law enforcement in Her Majesty's Customs and Excise, so it's something I do know a little about.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you think, I mean, do you think it's happening just because it's easier to do now? People are less worried about getting arrested, they're less worried about the consequences. What is it?
Oh, I think there's a couple of things, and I think things are changing, Mike. We might get onto that. So I think what happened over the last 10 years is that retail crime was effectively decriminalised. From 2014 onwards, the police and government, frankly, decided that retail crime wasn't important. It was something that shops should deal with, and the police very rarely turned up. If I go back 18 months ago, when we were detaining offenders in store through our undercover security teams, so we got them in our custody, we've made a citizen's arrest. 18 months ago, the police were turning up 2 times out of 10, which means 8 times out of 10 we were having to let them go. Now, we'll probably get onto this, Mike. What's interesting is that in the numbers the British Retail Consortium published yesterday, which we absolutely recognise, the experience of the co-ops been slightly different over the last 12 months in that we haven't seen crime rise like that. We've seen violent attacks reduce, and I think there's reasons for that because some of the things that the co-op has done and the police have done.
Okay, well, tell us about some of the measures you've taken then, which have had some effect.
So I think there's 3 things, Mike. I think the first thing is, and this is really important, and I speak as I said, a former law enforcement officer, the first responsibility to keep a shop and shop workers safe is the businesses. It's not the police's, it's the business. So that's why the co-op has spent about £250 million over the last few years. We spend 3 times the sector average on security measures. That could be body-worn cameras, it could be state-of-the-art CCTV, it could be product protection, it could be design restore, it could be guarding. Businesses have got to spend the money to keep colleagues safe, is the first point. The second point, though, is that businesses then also have to invest time working with the police. We've got about 15 police partnerships across the country in high-risk areas, and because we work closely with those forces, what we see is we see more than 500 individuals in those 15 areas alone that have been managed and have either got convictions or have got criminal behaviour orders, etc. So you've got to work with the police. But the second and the last thing, though, and this is really important, this is where I think things have changed, Mike, which is why I think the co-op have seen crime begin to flatten rather than rise, the police have to take it seriously. That figure I gave you, 15 months ago, 2 times out of 10, the police were turning up when we had detained the offender. Now, they're turning up 7 times out of 10. I've been really critical of the police on this show and on other shows. I think the police have really stepped up over the last 15 months, and they are turning up. They are beginning to intervene with offenders, and certainly for the co-op, whereas I think the rest of the sector saw a 20% rise, we've seen it broadly flat, and whereas the rest of the sector saw a 50% rise in violence, we've seen violence against our colleagues drop. Now, it's still too much crime, too many of my colleagues are attacked, but we are just beginning to see the green shoots of potential this getting better.
Good. Well, that's good news. That's the first bit of good news on crime I think I've heard all year. Well, not just for this year, but for most of last year as well. So well done. Congratulations. Maybe we can roll it all out to other places and actually get people involved and get the police back involved in dealing with this stuff. Paul, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Paul Gerard, Co-op's Director of Campaigns there, saying, you know, believe it or not, when you take issue with these criminals, when you make sure that they can be caught, when you make sure the police do come and visit and arrest them, yes, it might actually stop the crime, or at least it might reduce it a little bit. I'd love to hear from you if you've got stories on that front, by the way, if you're running a shop or you've got a business which has been the victim of this kind of crime. I know a lot of you do listen to us. Let's go to the phone zone. Jamie's in Fife, wants to talk about Brexit. Jamie, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, very well, sir. What can I do for you?
Yeah, I was listening to your show this morning, and you're talking about Rachel Reeves and economic growth in the country. Yeah. And today, 31st January, the laws are actually changing, or the systems are changing for British companies importing from the European Union specifically.
Right.
Since Brexit, you know, I import a lot of tea products from Europe, from Germany in particular. Since Brexit, I've had no issues, none whatsoever. Yeah, I've got handlers that deal with a little bit of import duty, and that's absolutely fine. This week, the company I buy from sent me an email saying, you're going to now have to start filling in paperwork at your end and send it to us, and this comes as a complete shock to me.
Wow. And so this is something the Labour government's introduced?
As far as I'm aware, it's taken effect from today.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I'm now stuck with about, 5 tons of product in Germany that I'm racing around trying to find somebody to fill in the paperwork for me so that I can get it sent to my supplier and get it released out of Germany.
Right.
But the government's actual advice on their website is one of 2 things. Either 1, I need to find and employ the services of a company to do that for me, or 2, I can buy a piece of software and then sit and figure out how to create that piece of paperwork and then send it. So either way, it's going to cost me more money to now import. You know, I'm like, how on earth is that stimulating and economic growth and making the process more simple?
Yeah.
The government has absolutely no clue what they're doing.
No. They don't seem to understand the whole business of business. They don't understand the business of farming. No, they don't understand the business of import-export. They don't understand the economy. They don't understand growth. Everything they're doing is anti-growth.
Yeah. I mean, there's clearly a lack of business knowledge in this government. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I'm absolutely astounded by what's happening today and this week with processes that, since Brexit happened, it has been absolutely, first 6 months, it was tough, been smooth ever since, and here we go. Now this process is being frustrated again. It's madness, absolute madness. And, you know, for any government to turn around and go, yeah, we're going to fix the economy and we're going to stimulate growth, they are not making it easy for small, medium-sized businesses to grow.
They're really not. No, they're absolutely not. They're stopping everything stone dead. Jamie, really interesting call. Thank you so much. Well, a very fascinating perspective there as well, because we hear this all the time from the, Rejoin Brigade, that, businessmen and women have had a terrible time ever since Brexit, all of the red tape that they've had to deal with. Well, according to Jamie, it hasn't been a problem at all. So I'd rather listen to him than some biased maniac like Alistair Campbell. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get a voice note from Tony, who's got some Friday cheer.
Hi, Mike. Great show as usual. This country, we're doomed with this communist government in at the moment, with socialist Starmer, communist Starmer, and Rachel from account immigrants coming over, illegal immigrants coming over on the boats. What's going to happen? Where they're putting them all, once all these hotels are full, which it will be, maybe in about 3 or 4 years, if it carries on like this, where they're going to stay, it's going to choke the economy. No infrastructure, it's all going to stay the same. We keep talking about, we stop the boats crash, stop the gangs. It couldn't stop a bloody bus.
Well, that wasn't very cheerful, Tony, I have to say. But listen, you're absolutely right. I can't argue with any of that. They couldn't stop anything from happening other than growth. They've managed to stop growth. That's about all they've done. I was asking earlier for Keir Starmer to show us his growth. He doesn't seem to have any. Doesn't seem to have one. Talking about Rachel Reeves and her CV, Gary says, lying on a CV, is that not fraud? Is it not a sackable offence? Well, I think it should be. We might have to replay that clip, actually, of Richard Madeley asking Rachel Reeves about her CV, because, quite frankly, she deserves to be given a much harder time about this because she doesn't answer the question about the lies on her CV. Have a look.
Why did you say that you'd worked at the Bank of England for a decade when, in fact, it was... Well, it wasn't even 6 years, it was 5. I mean, that's exaggeration, isn't it?
Well, I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years, between 2000 and 2006. I was employed by the Bank of England, including I spent just over a year at the British Embassy working in the economics section there, supporting the government and the bank.
Why did you say it was a decade?
Well, I think you're taking... I think it's one interview. I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years. I worked for then at Halifax Bank of Scotland, I think, for 3 years after that. I became an MP when I was 31. But I think in the end, people want to judge me on the job that I'm doing today as Chancellor of the Exchequer. I'm qualified to do this job. But in the end, people are going to judge me. Am I growing the economy? Am I improving their living standards? And I'm determined to do just that.
No and no. You're not growing the economy and you're not doing a very good job. And you did lie on your CV and you didn't explain why. I mean, who makes 6 into 10 and then says, I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years? You can imagine Keir Starmer saying it. I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years. She basically worked at the Bank of England in her 20s when she was young. So I don't think the job was particularly senior. She then went to work for HBOS up in Halifax, and where she was basically working in customer service. That's what we know. Gary says Starmer was complicit in CV lies. As such, there was no due diligence conducted. Well, he made that mistake, didn't he, with old Louise Haigh, the woman who was the Transport Secretary, who turned out to have a conviction for fraud. I mean, you think you might have checked that before you make her a Minister of State. And then there's Tulip Siddiq, the woman who was appointed to be the corruption minister, or rather the anti-corruption minister, who's now being investigated by the Bangladeshi government for corruption, who may indeed be extradited to Bangladesh to face charges of corruption. And then there was Sue Gray, of course. Remember her? The woman who was going to be in charge of the first 100 days of Keir Starmer's glorious new government. She lasted 93 days. And when was forced to resign. I think she's in the House of Lords now. That's where they all end up. Unbelievable stuff, isn't it? Let's have one more. This is from Sam. Morning, Mike. Well, if Starmer and his cronies are tarnishing all centre-right as far-right white supremacists, then by default, he and the rest of them must be extremist, oppressive, left Orwellian supremacists. They must be. There's no law against that, though. Yeah, that's fine. You can be one of them. The Home Office would be more than happy to give you some money, maybe a grant to set up a youth centre or something. Coming up, we're going to talk to Francis Egan, who's the CEO of Quadrilla. That's a company that does a bit of shale gas scenario. They've started a couple of shale gas wells, but of course they've now been told they've got to cement them over, pour a load of concrete down them in case we actually manage to get some cheap energy. We can't have any of that. Ed Miliband is at the helm. This is Talk.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear? Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence. She has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
8:54, a very good morning to you. This is Morning Glory, of course, here with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Rachel from Accounts, any body language expert will tell you rapid blinking is a sign of not being very honest, says Stephen. It's true. She looks absolutely petrified every time anybody asks her a question, doesn't she? And she has no clue, really, what she's doing. I'm afraid to say that. I'd like to say something positive about this government, but I'm finding it very, very difficult to find anything to say which is in any way positive. The latest ridiculous idea is that they now want to apparently basically cement over and concrete over the situation regarding two viable shale gas wells, basically. They were set up by Quadrilla, the company that wants to extract gas from the shale wells. They've been told basically they want to be decommissioned and the site should be unavailable for work basically by June of this year. The process is going to begin next month. We've got the CEO of Quadrilla here with us now, Francis Egan. Francis, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Oh, this sounds like a mad idea, doesn't it? I mean, why is it that they need to destroy things and make it so that nobody can ever use them ever again?
Well, I think mad is a rather generous assessment of this idea. The wells in question are the only two remaining shale gas wells in the country.
Yeah.
They've been drilled at great expense to a depth of between 2.5 and 3 kilometres underground in Lancashire, and they've proven that there is shale gas and it can flow to surface.
Yeah.
And now we have to go on site, pull out kilometres of steel casing that line the well, and then pump hundreds of metres of cement down the wells, rendering them permanently unusable.
Right. And I mean, is there not
don't ask me where the sense in that is.
Yeah, no, there isn't any sense in it. And is there not some legal process that you could trigger? It seems to me that you shouldn't be allowed. I mean, if you're a private organisation, you're a commercial organisation, why should you be dictated to by the government on this basis?
Well, the regulator is in charge of all of this. Of course, the regulator reports to the government ultimately.
Yeah.
The regulator says, well, the wells have reached the end of their useful life, and this is typically what happens when wells reach the end of their useful life. Except in this case, the wells never even started their useful lives because they were strangled at birth by regulation and red tape. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to say, well, this is industry practice. This is what we do when the wells finish. And whether you agree with fracking or don't agree with fracking, pouring cement down the wells is not sensible. You should keep them. There's no cost to the taxpayer in keeping them. Who knows what might happen in the future, and you might want to use them. But as of the end of June, they will be permanently unusable and will generate a lot of CO2 emissions in the process.
Yes, exactly right. I mean, that's the other kind of ironic thing about all of these green manoeuvrings that they want to do, this government. They seem to not have taken into account the fact that an awful lot of what it is that they want to do is not very green at all. You know,
well, yeah, I mean, and if you look at what shale has achieved in the United States, currently their electricity prices are 4 times less than ours for businesses and 3 times less for customers, which is why, of course, all energy-intensive businesses, and you've heard Jim Ratcliffe at INEOS saying that the UK and Europe are just basically shutting down industry. And we say we're reducing CO2 emissions, but in fact, all we're doing is exporting them.
Yes.
Between 2005 and 2022, UK energy supply declined remarkably, declined by 30%, I think. And people think, well, that must be a good thing. Well, it's not a good thing.
No.
Well, that means your industry is going overseas and your consumers can't afford to turn on the heat.
Yeah, and we're getting absolutely rinsed by the people that are selling us the energy from whether it's Qatar or America. I mean, we're actually buying in shale gas, are we not? From
we are buying in shale gas from the US. We
Yeah.
are turning it into a liquid. We are transporting it across the Atlantic in huge tankers called liquefied natural gas. When it gets here, we have to turn it back into a gas, and then we put it into our system. And we don't count the CO2 emissions for that because we didn't generate it here.
Yeah.
So it's like taking the accounts off the books.
Yeah, and it also, from the point of energy security, it leaves us much more vulnerable, does it not, to what happened when Putin sort of turned off the gas supply to Western Europe?
Well, not just that. I mean, as you probably know, 2 weeks ago, the wind didn't blow. And in the middle of the night, the sun wasn't shining and it was very cold. And wind power generated about 1% of our electricity. If it hadn't been for gas stations firing up, we would have had a blackout. And the government paid out millions of pounds for 2 hours worth of electricity.
I know. Incredible. We've got a message for Ed Miliband, if you could find him.
Well, I think, engineering and common sense should come into the equation along with ideology. That's a polite message.
Yes. Very well put, I think. Very well put. Thank you very much indeed. Francis Egan. We must talk some more. CEO of Quadrilla, a company that has brilliantly found a way of extracting shale gas from beneath the surface of the earth, right? Bringing it up to the top of the surface of the earth and turning it into what can only be described as very warm energy, which could create all manner of happiness to people who are paying more for their electricity than anybody else in the entire Western world. And what have the government told them to do? Oh, no, you don't want to do that. We'll shut those whole things down. The 2 wells that they've got in Lancashire have been ordered to be closed and to be filled with concrete, effectively, as of June of this year. It's complete madness, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We've got loads more coming up in the final hour of the show. This is Talk.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, Oivamo slides it in. An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public is not being told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use by Ukraine.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 4 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham, with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Russell Quirk is in at 10. He's sitting in for Alex Phillips. We've got lots to do. We've been talking about Donald Trump throughout the course of the show. We'll continue to do that. He's obviously set the cat amongst the pigeons with his press conference yesterday in Washington, D.C. After that terrible accident where a Black Hawk helicopter, crashed into a commercial airliner as it was just about to land at Reagan National Airport. 67 people perished, died in the Potomac River, which was freezing cold, and it was obviously in the middle of the night, of course, as well. We'll talk to James Price coming up in a moment. We'll get his view on all of that. Plus, Rachel Reeves is back in the news because she's supposedly bringing us growth. She's supposedly bringing us a third runway. She's supposedly bringing us eternal happiness. But unfortunately, all we get is lies and more lies and more lies. Let's have a listen to Mark.
Morning, Mike. It's Mark in Lancashire. I see Rachel from customer service is busy casting magic spells again, doing her Sorcerer's Apprentice act. She must have forgotten to say Shazam straight after she tried to magically turn 6 years into a decade.
Yeah, she got TARDIS in the back room at the number 11 Downing Street as well, so she can travel through time. Yeah, how many years you spend there? Yeah, about 20. Debbie says this: I might work at a doctor's surgery, Mike. I have done for 20 years. Can I put on my CV that I'm a doctor? Yeah, of course you can. But only if you want to run the National Health Service or, in fact, be the Secretary of State for Health like Wes Streeting. You don't know anything about it either. It's amazing, isn't it? Meanwhile, the legal chief of the government is under threat. Once again, we said this before, Lord Hermer, or Harmer, as I like to call him, KC, of course, a big mate of Keir Starmer's. He's in trouble because apparently he's being accused by cabinet members of obstructing his own government. Well, that's not very good, is it? 0344 499 1000. We've also got news today that Tunisia is being handed 5 million quid so that they can give it to the people of Tunisia to learn how to speak English better, with the thought in mind that if they speak English better, they won't want to come here on a small boat. I don't get it either. Maybe you can explain it to me. Also, £1 in every £15 spent on benefits is either a mistake or fraud. Right? OK. And in London, a ULEZ fine is issued every 15 seconds. Absolutely amazing. It's also the 5th anniversary of Brexit, by the way, so we'll take your views on that as well. 0344 499 1000. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Ian in Liverpool says, Rachel Reeves in the Maidley interview says, people will judge me on what I have done. And he says, we have. Thanks very much indeed. Cheerio. That's right. One from Alan in Merseyside. Reeves said that the last time a full-length runway was built was in the 1940s. Can I point out that Manchester's full-length runway was opened in 2001? Well, you can, but I suppose they would say that was not really a whole runway. They started with a small runway and ended up with a bigger one. We talked to people yesterday who said, what about RAF Manston down in Kent? Why don't you just use that for all of the cargo stuff, and then you can expand Heathrow without even building a third runway? Exactly right. One from somebody who works for the Co-op says, 2 armed robberies we had last year and the Co-op has still done nothing to keep us safe. This guy speaks a good game, but nothing has changed at all. Well, I suppose what he was saying with the guy from the Co-op on shoplifting was that basically they have concentrated on what they call high-risk areas. Maybe yours isn't one, I don't know. And Phil in Thurrock says the biggest betrayal after the Brexit vote was the morning after resignations from Prime Minister Cameron, Ed Miliband and others. Politics went to utter disarray. The government was hamstrung. We got the disastrous Prime Minister Theresa May and Corbyn. Boris winning as Prime Minister was supposed to be the light, but he too was undermined. And now here we are. What a waste. It feels like a bit of a waste, doesn't it? Let's talk to James Price, former Downing Street advisor, see what he's got to say. James, very good morning to you.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Very well indeed. Very well indeed. We'll get onto the DEI conversations that we want to get onto about Donald Trump in a minute. But I just want to ask you about Brexit, first of all. It feels as though, 5 years ago, was a very long time ago. An awful lot has happened, an awful lot of water under the bridge, an awful lot of, you know, betrayals politically, a lot of resignations, a lot of appointments, you know. I remember feeling quite optimistic, and I've said this already on the show, people are probably sick of hearing it, but I remember feeling quite optimistic this time 5 years ago, before COVID. You know, I felt like we were actually literally on the brink of a new era, and I was really looking forward to it. It kind of never quite happened.
Yeah, that's right. There was that that doomed tweet from Boris Johnson at the start of 2020 where he said that 2020 was going to be a great year for Britain, and then, as you say, COVID came along and all these kinds of horrors.
Yeah.
I suppose my real take on Brexit is it sounds like a great idea and that we should really try it sometime. You know, as you said, all the kind of trials and tribulations during the campaign, which is fine, I suppose that's part of a campaign, and then after the result and all those ghastly Ramonas who were just going on and on and on and on about how you did a second referendum and you shouldn't bother to respect the result and all that kind of stuff that really poisoned the well in the first place. And then when we finally got it done, as you say again, COVID came along, we haven't really had the opportunity to properly take advantage of the opportunities that are there, the ways that we can kind of diverge and do things away from Europe. And yet the few areas where we have actually seen benefits are because we're not there, just by default, because the EU has been so terrible. So whether that's kind of the COVID vaccine rollout, the development, we did so well at that because we weren't stuck to stupid EU rules. Or when you look at the fact that the European Union now is boasting about, oh, we're the best people in the world at regulating AI.
Yeah.
Got any AI companies to regulate. So there's sort of no point to it. And the most innovative thing that the European Union has managed to come up with in the last few years is when you buy a bottle of Coca-Cola or something, you can't get the damn bottle off, right? That's the innovation they've done.
Yeah, I know, absolutely ridiculous. But I mean, this is the whole problem, isn't it? It's like a kind of a ridiculous construct that was invented by somebody that didn't know what they were doing. And here we have the European Union. Nobody knows what it's for, really. You know, each of the European countries is now sort of falling into disrepair in one way, shape, or form. And whenever there's any kind of stress on the union itself, they all go for sort of UDI. They all go. Do you remember during COVID, the Germans suddenly started shutting their borders to Italy, and it was like, oh no freedom of movement anymore. No, thanks very much indeed. Now they're shutting their borders again to immigrants. You know, and nobody really pays much attention to Brussels at all, do they?
No, I think that's absolutely right. You only have to see the way that certain people around the Trump administration are basically just openly mocking the European Union. You know, what started off as a way of stopping there being war by increasing trade, perfectly nice idea, and then actually reducing trade barriers, also a nice idea. I don't want my government or any other government getting in the way of businesses that want to trade goods and services with each other. That all seems perfectly sensible. They couldn't help themselves though, right? And you get all these mad stories that are true about 10,000 pages on the regulation of the sale of cabbages and all this other kinds of nonsense, which is bad enough. And then the fact that they come in and they say, no, we people you've never heard of, you've never voted for, hiding away in Brussels of all places, are going to tell you how to run your lives. And we've got half free of it now. So in the future, we will still be able to go and do good, exciting things when we don't have this ghastly Labour government who wants to shackle us to the EU. But you still see the leftovers, things like the European Convention on Human Rights, which we've actually imported into our domestic law. So we'd have to get rid of bits of our domestic law that make reference to it now. But you've got the Attorney General, Hermer, I like that you call him Hermer, who said yesterday, we never disagree with the ECHR ever. Well, that doesn't sound like a sovereign country yet. We've got to get out of that too.
Well, it also sounds completely and utterly idiotic. I mean, why would you even say I'm never going to disagree with an organisation, a body, which could occasionally come up with the wrong decision? Why would you say in advance, I'll never... It's like me saying to you, I'll never disagree with you, James, ever, in the history of our relationship. When I see you in 10 years' time, whether you've become a masked intruder, I will still agree with everything you say. It's ridiculous. Totally mad. You won't be disappointed to know that Sadiq Khan has marked the occasion of the 5th anniversary of Brexit. He's put a tweet out in which he says this: 5 years on from Brexit, London remains a European city where European Londoners are valued and cherished. You are our neighbours, colleagues, friends and loved ones. Thank you for making London your home. You are wanted here and always will be. I mean, seriously? Really?
I suppose it's Sadiq's kind of weird fetish to see his name and his face plastered all over the city, even if that city ends up being, Stab City, as it's increasingly becoming. But it's a weird fetish at this point. And you think that this kind of like, oh my God, we must talk about how open and wonderful we are, despite all the horrendous results. You know, the number of foreign criminals running around and all these sorts of problems. I just don't understand why we've got to this point. And the result was pretty clear, right? Let's remember, there's over 1 million people more voted to leave than to remain. And yet there were some leavers, people like Dan Hannan, a kind of the intellectual mastermind behind a lot of this, who said, you know what, yeah, it was a good result. It wasn't, 70-30 or something. So let's have a sensible conversation about how we leave and all the rest of it. But it was people like Sadiq Khan who couldn't accept the fact that they were losers and fought this horrendous rearguard that has so poisoned all of our culture. We could have become
and they could never dream of putting out a tweet that welcomed all the British people that live in London. I'm very proud of all the British people or English people, because he isn't, and he wouldn't want to ever recognise them as such. Let's talk about Donald Trump, though, because we really must. And some of the things he came out with yesterday were quite extraordinary. Let's have a listen to what he said about the FAA and the numbers of people from various different, what we might call minority groups that they are trying to recruit.
The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway.
It seems incredible, doesn't it, that that's what's happened? I mean, obviously, you and I have much in common about our love of America and our admiration for so much of it. But, I mean, the DEI stuff is just ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's get this right here, right? Well, this is a conscious and active rejection for a very, very long time of the idea of merit and of competency in general, in favour of let's just try and be amorphously nice and cuddly and open and all the rest of it. But it's nice to be cuddly and open and all the rest of it, but not, as the President of America just said, not when it comes to flying an enormous plane that could have, as we've seen from history, become a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. And I think it speaks to a wider kind of competency crisis that we're starting to see across the West because we've been doing this. And, if you ended up, I don't know, if you were a black pilot or a pilot who was a dwarf or something, you'd always be there wondering in the back of your head, did I get this great job because I'm good or because somebody wanted me to tick a box? And that's itself a horrible feeling right before we start to get to the fact that, who knows how this horrible accident happened, but was it the result of people who were not properly qualified being involved? Well, it's not beyond the wit of man, because we've seen how crazy so many of these DEI rules are. And let's remember, of course, that when this DEI stuff happens in America, it doesn't stay there. The American cultural power is so strong that it ends up coming over here as well. We're now riddled with all of this nonsense too.
Oh, we know certainly the civil services, and we also know that many of the banks in this country went down that particular road as well, because we also know that in America they're now reversing all of that. I mean, Wall Street has basically given up on DEI. All of the big merchant banks and all the big sort of commercial organisations have started to go, actually, we're not really going to do this because we know Donald Trump's not keen on it, so let's just forget about it. And so, immediately perhaps they'll see a boon there, and they'll see, more efficient, because, as Trump said, he doesn't care what colour somebody's skin is, he doesn't care how many extremities they've got, or, how tall they are, or how short they are, what they sound like. They just want the best people for the job. And as he says, for this particular job, air traffic control, you need a lot of people. And we had a story earlier on this morning that's reported by the Associated Press that apparently there was only one air traffic controller on duty at the time of this accident.
Yeah, that's very concerning, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit nerdy, this. One of my favourite economists is a man called Gary Becker, who talks about that if companies, or I suppose even the civil service and public bodies, if they were racist and therefore didn't take the best person because they happened to be black, or they were sexist and didn't take the best person just because they were a woman, they would suffer, and their competitors would hire that amazing person and do better than them, and therefore market forces or whatever would defeat all these horrible isms. But of course, as we're saying here, it goes both ways, and that's the real problem here. You want the best people for the job, and there is this, I think, deeper, more pernicious thing of the kind of what I think George Bush used to call the soft bigotry of low expectations. This idea that you've got to reduce the difficulties of a job someone is from some kind of background because it's mean to help them out. It's so damn patronising.
Yeah.
Let's get away from that and let's reward merit and excellence and show, especially young people, that if you work hard and you're smart and you're talented, then that's how you can go and do things and succeed in the world.
Yeah, absolutely right. Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you very much indeed. James Price, political commentator. Let's have another clip from Donald Trump just before we move on. And this is the one where he mentions that magic phrase once again, common sense.
I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game at the highest level.
And there he is again, using that phrase, common sense. We are the home of common sense. Steve says this, the only growth Reeves will see is her Pinocchio nose as she tells lies to cover her lies. And Ian says, maybe if Rachel Reeves is not qualified to be Chancellor, she must have been a DEI appointment. Well, do you know what, Ian? You remember the way that Keir Starmer introduced her as the first female Chancellor and how women and girls, young women and girls, will be looking up to her forever as a great example of what her sex can do. Well, surely that is a DEI appointment then, because he's basically appointed her because she's a woman. And it hasn't turned out terribly well, has it? Mike, with rising energy prices, closing the Shell wells just makes me want to weep. Shale wells, I think, just makes me want to weep. This government must really want us to suffer, says Michelle. Well, they've once again caving in to the do-gooders, caving into the environmentalists who think that shale gas is bad for us and that drilling for it is even worse for us, causes earthquakes, all this kind of stuff. So instead we buy it in from America at huge cost and in not a very green way. Let's get a voice note from Hannah.
Mike, I know for a fact that the government's growth plan is complete cobblers. They were talking with business leaders and tech companies in Silicon Valley. My husband was one of them, about harnessing AI within the UK and becoming a forefront of that technology. The business leaders and tech companies advised that our energy costs were so high, to run a data centre would be 40 million a year rather than 20 million a year. A single rack in a data centre to power with energy is 30,000 a year. That's just for one rack. So Keir Starmer and his lunatic communist friends said no, because it was against net zero. So there's no growth.
Of course there's no growth. And we're looking for growth, and we're looking for Starmer's growth. He doesn't have one. It's as simple as that. Paul in Leeds says, it's plain to see the Ramonas and those with influence have blocked Brexit in every way possible, so the UK doesn't thrive and boom. Why weren't the nation told about the implications of leaving before we joined in the 70s? Absolute BS. Very true. The 70s. Anybody remember that? I do. People voted to join the European Economic Community, which was nothing like the European Union, and only had a few members, and it was only supposed to be about economics, something Rachel Reeves' is a specialty in. She went to the London School of Economics to study economics, don't you know? And she was an economist after that. This is Talk.
full-length runway in Britain was built in the 1940s. No progress in 80 years. A third runway could increase potential GDP by 0.43% by 2050.
Could a new runway be built that abides with carbon targets, concerns around noise pollution and concerns around air pollution?
That a third runway at Heathrow would unlock further growth, boost investment, increase exports and make the UK more open and more connected.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 9:24 with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Russell Quirk coming in for Alex Phillips this morning. We'll be bringing you all of the latest news from that terrible accident in Washington, D.C. yesterday. We'll also keep you updated as well on all manner of things that are going on in this British Parliament of ours, which doesn't do much on a Friday, but the government will still be pushing their way through all the way until the weekend. No doubt there'll be more ridiculous announcements coming. One of the ones that was a more ridiculous announcement yesterday was that there was a new crime introduced to the migrant situation. Basically, there's a new crime of endangering lives if you're bringing people over on small boats. Of course, what they haven't taken into account, really, is the fact that the people who are bringing the people over in small boats are already committing crime and they're already creating more and more criminal activity. Basically, illegal migrants crossing the Channel will now face up to 5 years in jail if, amongst other things, they refuse to be rescued. Well, we have the other story this morning as well about Tunisia. We're giving Tunisia £5 million to teach people English so that when they learn English, they won't want to come here. I don't know what that would, what effect that would have. Peter in Solihull says, morning, Mike. Instead of teaching English to the Tunisians, the way things are going, it would make more sense to teach Tunisian to the English. Let's talk to Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO commander, to get his view. Chris, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I don't really quite understand governments in this country who think that they can control criminality by passing more laws to the people who already break those laws that they've got already.
Yeah, I mean, this latest version is sort of tinkering around the edges. There's no real coherent strategy in any of this. And it's rather like trying to apply sticking plaster to a gaping wound.
Yeah.
I mean, the issue is there are so many loopholes in even this legislation. For example, if you claim you've been trafficked as part of modern slavery, then you're going to be allowed in.
Right.
And the fact of life is, until you actually apply a rule that says that you hit the users, not the traffickers. In other words, if you cross the border, then you're committing an offence. Whatever the reason, you're never going to stop this. You have to say to people, look, if you want to claim asylum, you claim asylum on the French side.
Yeah.
If you want to say you want to come to Britain, then go through the normal channels. The fact of life is, if you try to penetrate the border at Heathrow, you're committing an offence.
Yeah.
Why isn't it see? It's ridiculous.
I know. Although the last time I came into Heathrow, I saw a sign that said that if you wanted to claim asylum, this is what you have to do on arrival. So, I mean, I don't know if they've changed the rules on that, because it was the first time I'd seen that sort of sign. I think I saw it sort of middle of last year when I was coming back from somewhere. And I don't, you can't really have much hope that the Home Office will get any of this stuff right, knowing what we now know about them, where they sit around mostly, coming up with reasons to blame the far right for everything.
Well, I think there's more serious worry in the Home Office. I mean, there are signs of quite clear activism and subversion of our processes. Yeah. And until, I'm afraid, our bureaucrats cease to actually think that their personal views are more important than the public service, we're always going to have a very leaky sieve as far as that sort of thing is concerned. And my own view is we need a full inquiry, independent inquiry into how the Home Office operates. Yeah. It's it hasn't been fit for purpose for probably 20 years.
No, exactly right. And when you watch what they're doing in America, when you see the way they're handling the migrants there, it's very clear that it can be done. I know that we're not the same country and that presidents and prime ministers don't have the same powers and all of that, but I was very refreshed to see the new press secretary, who's a young woman, she's only 27 years of age, basically saying, you know, when she was asked by the lefty journalists, you know, well, how do you know these people are criminals that you're deporting, and how many of them are criminals? She went, well, they're all criminals because they've all come into the country illegally, therefore they're criminals, which I think is right.
Mike, you know, you've got a party that's got a 150 seat majority. They can introduce any law they like to stop migrants coming across the channel. They could even introduce a rule saying the colour of the sky above the clouds is green, not blue, if they wanted to. You know, they have it in their power to do this. But I'm afraid to say they're captive to so many different lobbies that they don't have the political will or courage to take action.
Yeah. And what about this law of the sea thing? I mean, you're a man of the ocean waves, you know about these things. I mean, endangering lives at sea is now going to be a new criminal offence. But there's also this thing, is there not, where you are sort of duty-bound to rescue people if they appear to be in difficulties?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Mike, under a thing called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and also the Safety of Life at Sea legislation. But here's the clear thing, and I've said this for many years now, you simply have to take people to a place of safety. It doesn't say you have to take them to the United Kingdom.
Right.
And so, you know, there's all sorts of interpretations that you can put on that. I mean, the fact of life is human rights legislation at the moment, particularly with this government, trumps all sorts of other legislation. And until we actually get out of this bind, we're not going to be able to stop paying the lawyers these inflated sums, and secondly, not going to be able to enforce our border legislation.
No, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's not looking like it's getting any better anytime soon. Rear Admiral Chris Parry, great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Former NATO commander, man that talks an awful lot of common sense, by the way. Morning, Mike, says, Phil, I think you'll find that Sakir has said he would smash the smuggling gangs, not the smuggling gangs. He'd be hard-pressed to find a smuggling gang these days, so he's achieved his goal. People so underestimate Sakir. Shall we have a listen?
To smash the people smuggling gangs.
Smash the people smuggling guns. I mean, how useless does this guy have to be? Let's get a call. John is in Dorset. Hello, John.
Oh, good morning, Mike.
Morning, sir. What can I do for you?
Basically, I was telling your producer that I'm a volunteer digital champion. We work in the libraries helping people to get digital access. There are about 30 or 40 in Dorset, and most counties have got volunteers doing the same thing.
Right.
I took an interest in claiming pension credit because it was quite simple. It looks awful, but if you know your way around forms and stuff, it's quite simple. So now, if people come with the right information, and I print out the requirements from the YouGov or gov.uk website, I can process a claim in about 15 minutes. Because I'm used to going down. I don't go all up and down the you know, if the answer to 7 is yes, go to 10. Right. Now, apparently Rachel Reeves was going to save 1.4 billion by cutting the winter fuel. I read an article 2 days ago that all the people on pension credit now are costing them 8.6 billion.
Really? Then that's interesting.
So she must have got her economics degree from the School of the Abacus.
Exactly right. Well, this is the other thing, because, I mean, immediately they announced it was going to make them 1.4 billion. They then declared that because of the people who are going to be affected, who shouldn't have been affected, they were going to give another 400,000, or 400 million rather, back to the local authorities in order to kind of take care of the shortfall, if you like. So it was already reduced down to 1 billion. And so, as you say, if it's now costing another 8 billion to supply people with pension credit, then it's a completely ridiculous tax. And the same goes for the VAT on schools tax. You know, they're not going to get the amount of money they thought they were going to get. The same as the farmers. They're going to get 500 million, they say, from the farmers. Well, that's not going to happen. And even if it does happen, it'll probably be 200 million.
If the man in the posh wellies had read his own DEFRA report on the 16th of September last year, he would have found that the number of farmers affected is significantly higher.
Exactly.
Apparently 54% of farms are owner-occupied, 21% are joint tenancies. And with the big landowners, if they've got a tenancy, they'll kick the tenant into touch rather than lose the tax.
Yeah, of course. Exactly right. And so people will fight it. People will fight it. We're run by complete and utter charlatans and idiots.
Led by lunatics.
Yeah, totally true.
Built
Great
by
call.
Karl Marx.
Yeah, John, thank you very much indeed. Fantastic. How about this from Keith in Durham? Morning, Mike. It's 5 years today since we left the EU. I voted to leave, but we have not got control of our borders, our waters, our own laws. Starmer is even now colluding to take us closer to the EU. And Mike in South East London says this. This is good. Working 6 years with Rachel from accounts would seem like 10 years. Absolutely right. Let's get a voice note from Kim on shale gas.
Good morning, Mike. Kim from near Bristol here. This business of filling up the shale wells that we haven't even used, surely this is just a massive act of self-harm. I get that some people are dead against it, but surely even they can see that it would be sensible and intelligent to leave the wells as they are in case we need them in the future. If we don't, we are fools. The rest of the world is moving on and we're sitting here self-flagellating and nobody cares. Our virtual signals will not pay the bills. Keep going, Mike. We need more of you.
Kim, thank you very much indeed. It's absolutely right. Peter Hitchens talks about this as well, because we've had in the past the decommissioning of various different power stations, coal-fired power stations, which we don't want anymore because it's too dangerous for the environment, right? But as Peter Hitchens has pointed out, instead of just shutting it down and leaving it, they destroy it. They blow it up. They basically put explosives everywhere, every single part of the power station, and blow the hell out of it, so that nobody could ever go back and use it again. And with the shale gas wells, it makes surely loads and loads of sense, considering that Quadrilla have spent quite a bit of money actually getting the wells working and getting the wells down to the depths that they needed to get them to, making sure that the process was clean, making sure that the process was safe. They did all that, and now the government says you've got to fill them in. Just in case anybody tries to use them. It's unbelievable, isn't it? How about this from Ali? My doctor's surgery have adopted what they call the triage appointment system. You have to go online and fill in a form to give your reasons for requesting an appointment to see a doctor. Your application form will then be triaged by someone within the practice, and if an acceptable reason is found in your application, you will then be sent a link to your smartphone. When you receive the link, you can then telephone and wait in the queue, as it were, to try and make an appointment from those that have been released for that particular time period. This is hardly a user-friendly system for pensioners, or indeed anyone else. So what happens if you ring up and you haven't been triaged? Do they just refuse to answer? Do they tell you you have to get into another queue? It's ridiculous, isn't it? These people, they come up with all these new-fangled ways of doing things which turn out to be worse than the way they used to do them. How do they manage that? It's quite extraordinary. I had a letter from the tax people the other day, made absolutely no sense. Complete rubbish. And the bottom line was, we're going to charge you this anyway, or something like that, despite what you've actually appealed. Ridiculous. It's 9:35.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham. It's 9:38. I don't know where the time has gone. It's Friday as well, by the way. I'm looking out the window. It looks pretty grim out there. It's pouring. Can't see any sunshine at all. Very grey indeed. I don't know what it's going to be like over the weekend, but hopefully it will clear up a little bit. We've got lots going on, of course, over the weekend. One of the highlights being the thing you look forward to on a Friday night, Plank of the Week. Let's have a look. This is the police, right? And they've got the blue lights on. They're chasing this woman who's in a wheelchair. Right?
2 miles an hour.
You can hear the siren, right?
That is brilliant.
The best thing about it is, right, they cut her up and she goes round them. What's that?
That is brilliant.
They tried to cut her up again and she goes round on the other side, goes round the back.
Any minute now, do they get one of those stingers out?
And people are shouting.
They taser her.
Just get out and chase after her. They've stayed in the car. She's doing like 3 miles
probably because the
an
police
hour.
officers are so fat they probably couldn't run after her.
No.
I mean, I was surprised that the police even turned up.
Right, well, that was right.
In the first place.
I was astonished.
Yeah.
It's a shoplifting
She's still at
thing.
it. Look, she's still
She's
at
still
it.
going. Yeah, I know, amazing. Absolutely
She's
amazing.
reached Leeds, by the way.
7 o'clock tonight, and of course, don't forget there is also a podcast out on Plank of the Week as well, so you can listen to it. If you can't watch it, you can always listen to it on the podcast. Before we speak to Tim Davies, a former RAF fighter pilot, about the things that happened in Washington, D.C. yesterday, that terrible accident where a military helicopter crashed into the back of a commercial airliner. It's time for a gaff, because it's Friday. Here's another one from Jeremy Kyle.
I've got a song I'd like to do for you.
A what?
That's all right. A song.
Right, has anybody heard this? Is this going to get me fired?
Don't you worry. No, they've vetted it. I've been vetted. 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Now the Westminster scene is frightful, and the policies are spiteful. But Starmer doesn't want to know. Let him go, let him go, let him go. With
Not bad, actually. Not bad at all. There is always a moment when you think, is this going to go horribly wrong? This one from Brian in Spain. This is pertinent to the next thing we're going to talk about. If there was only one air traffic controller, which is what we were told by the Press Association, in the building, maybe the others are working from home. Possible common sense. Well, who knows? Tim Davies is here, former RAF fighter pilot. Tim, very good morning to you.
Yeah, good to see you, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. Obviously a terrible, terrible accident. Lots of people, including the President, Donald Trump, saying it should never have happened, it should have been avoidable. I'm not expecting you to have the inner working knowledge of Reagan National Air Traffic Control, but everybody says it's a very tight space, it's a very small area that is a sort of is a fly zone, effectively. And I'm also told that the helicopters, the military helicopters, are flying around that kind of part of the world quite a lot. But looking at the footage, it looks as though almost the helicopter's behind the plane and just kind of flies into it.
Yeah, it does, and that's pretty much exactly what happened, isn't it? Really, it looks like there's routes, Mike, around that part of the part of the airspace that helicopters can use. They're well established. They've been there for a very long time, and the helicopter that did hit this airline was what's called a gold top. So. It worked for a unit that flew dignitaries from the military around, a UH-60 Black Hawk, very reliable helicopter, and a very reliable airline. And it just seems that what's happened here, whilst the airline's been on the final approach, is the helicopter has unfortunately crossed the path of it, which shouldn't have happened. And of course, they've collided.
Yeah. And I mean, according to, again, people that we've spoken to, and the Press Association have issued this as a news release earlier on today, there was only one air traffic controller in the building at the time of the accident. That seems to me to be not enough people, really, not enough air traffic controllers.
Well, you know, the policy's set, isn't it? So whatever their policy is needs to be questioned by a standardisation unit above them, and obviously it was. It was deemed to be acceptable. That was the case. Now, this is why you have standards officers, and I was a standards officer in the Royal Air Force on fast jets, so my job was to look at these policies and just to work out with my team whether they were acceptable. And what happens, Mike, whenever there's an incident like this, of course, there's a huge investigation, and they'll be looking at exactly things like this.
Yeah, absolutely right. And in terms of, like, the protocol of things like helicopters, army helicopters and military helicopters flying around commercial planes, I mean, Is there a specific protocol? I mean, I'm told that the people in the helicopter were also wearing night vision goggles, which are not necessarily the best thing for you to then see with, perhaps, at short distance. But there doesn't seem to have been much time between the tower saying, "Can you see them?" to the actual collision.
Yeah, well, the route that the helicopter should have been flying on, coming down from the north, was a route that it should never have been above 200 feet. In fact, on the maps, it says your maximum height here, under that approach lane to runway 33, is 200 feet. That's the maximum height you should be at. It should never be above that.
Right.
Now, they actually collided, I think, around about 400 feet. It does look like the helicopter was above that. And I think that President Trump has alluded to the fact that the helicopter should never have been there.
Right.
Also, the traffic collision avoidance systems that the aircraft has, they don't work. They don't give you the advisories. They don't tell you what to do below 1,000 feet because they can't advise you to fly into the ground. And the night vision goggles, when I was on Tornado here, I always do this the wrong way around, on Tornado there, when I was using night vision goggles, I was flying on the west coast of Scotland down at 250 feet. There's not many lights on the west coast of Scotland, but unfortunately in Washington there's a significant amount of lights. And what you get, Mike, is the blooming, like when you see the headlights of a car coming toward you and it sort of dazzles you for a bit. That's exactly what happens with night vision goggles. So I was very surprised to hear that they were flying night vision goggles in that helicopter, because personally, you don't need to. You can fly visual at night, VFR, visual flight rules. So, that's something they're going to have to look at in their investigation.
Right. And obviously the DEI stuff that Donald Trump has talked about has caused a massive upset to an awful lot of people. They said, well, you can't say that, you don't know what the situation is. But there's no question that some of the facts that he gave out in terms of the recruitment processes, obviously there's room for improvement, isn't there?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Now, we are Englishmen, Mike, so we're not going to comment on American governmental policy, of course, and we don't expect them to comment on ours. We're respectful for each country. However, we know there's been an issue with the Federal Aviation Authority with the recruitment of DEI. I think he actually said something about a week before he came into power that there was a move to bring in people with disabilities that wouldn't necessarily be conducive with the safe conduct of aviation necessarily. Now, of course, we knew it went too far. I campaigned, as you know, against the Royal Air Force for forcing diversity, equity and inclusion into meritocratic, hierarchical organisations such as our British military. And of course, we managed to obviously get them to backpedal on that quite significantly. But I think America is still going through that phase. And I think Trump's doing the right thing by having a look at it and working out what exactly has happened.
So how bad was it in the military here then, if you say it's improved? Has it got better here, or is it in certain areas and not in others?
Well, yeah, a lot of people have left that were enforcing the policy, which is good. When the military tried to recruit me back in a few months ago, and I'm still having a look at whether I do go, but I probably won't, to be fair, because we're all a little bit older now, Mike, aren't we? You know what I mean? You need sharp minds to be defending this nation. I'd say that right now. However, the military said to me, well, there's still some people that are enforcing pronouns in bios and signature blocks and things like that, but we know where they are, Tim. You know, we know where they are, and we kind of avoid them. So the people are still in the military that are obviously indoctrinated with this neo-Marxist diversity policy, we know. But hopefully, you know, we're chucking them out, because there's no place for them, Mike. There is a place for diversity within our military, but only so far as you're bringing in the absolute best people you can to defend the country. And obviously, I hope Trump gets to the bottom of this. I'm sure he will, because it can't happen again.
It absolutely can't, no. Thank you very much indeed. Tim Davis, former RAF fighter pilot there, talking an awful lot of common sense as well. But we've got a caller from called Anthony from Southend here, who's going to tell us about his experience. His son, I think, was in the army. Anthony, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you. What can you tell us, Anthony?
Well, my son is serving in the army and is serving now. And obviously we talk about his job and what he has to do. And he is fed up to the back teeth of this diversity lark.
Right.
He works in an area in the army where they have to carry an awful lot of equipment.
Right.
And you have to be very strong to do that.
Yes.
But now they're recruiting women to do this. They had to reduce the amount of equipment that they carry because the women can't carry it.
Right.
So that means they need more people to carry the equipment.
Right.
And the retention problem that he experiences is kind of in middle management in the army, let's say. The retention problem is absolutely enormous. There are people leaving right, left and centre because this diversity, idiotic inclusiveness is going on.
Yeah. And they, I mean, it's not a place... Sorry, go on.
One thing happened to him in Afghanistan. He's done 2 tours there.
Yeah.
A few people were talking about when they got back from Afghanistan, they were going to join the police. And they were told by a very senior man there, don't bother trying, you're not the right colour.
Really? That's extraordinary. And one of the things, of course, that we know is that, you know, in these kinds of jobs, you know, it's not just a job, as we've seen in Washington, D.C. You know, you can't mess around with these kinds of situations. You're in Afghanistan, you're on the front line, you're defending yourselves, you're defending, you know, your colleagues, you're defending an army base or something like that, or you're going out into Helmand Province on a patrol. You know, you need everybody to be, as our last guest said, Tim Davis, you know, you need sharp minds, you need physically fit people, strong people, you know, whatever they might be. There might be women that are strong enough to do it, but you don't just bring women in because they can carry less equipment, do you?
No, you don't bring women in. You bring the best people in.
Right.
And it's quite clear that men basically are much stronger.
Yeah.
I haven't got anything against women. I used to employ 130 women in the business because they were the best. So many good people.
Yeah.
Would you want Biden flying a plane for you?
No, definitely not. I wouldn't want Biden doing anything.
No,
Thanks very much, apart from lying down.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, absolutely
it's
right.
very frustrating. I watch it on my son's face all the time.
Yeah.
He enjoys his career. He's been in the army 14 years.
Yeah.
He enjoys it, but he's watching it deteriorate on a, I don't know, month-by-month basis.
Yeah. It's shocking. Well, listen, thanks for letting us know, Anthony. Great call. Very interesting stuff, isn't it? I mean, this diversity, equity and inclusion nonsense. I mean, where did it come from? I don't even remember when it started creeping in. How refreshing, says Kath, to see and listen to Rupert Lowe. In my view, a good old-fashioned statesman. He is head and shoulders above the current rabble in the House of Commons. Yeah, absolutely right. And John says, I think David Lammy is so expensive to fly around because he's classified as excess baggage. Very possibly so. 9:49 here. Russell Quirk is coming in to join us just before 10 o'clock. He's in for Alex Phillips. Let's get a voice note from Dan.
Morning, Mike. Dan from West Yorkshire. Happy Common Sense Friday. I did a paper round from being 12 to 16. Do you think I'll be qualified to be editor at Times?
Almost certainly. Well, it doesn't matter if you are editor at the time. Just say you are, or say you were for 4 years, or 10 years even. Well, just tell me you did it for 20 years. Why not? You know. Why did you say you were there for 10 years when you were only there for 6 years? I'm very proud of the work that I did before I became a politician. Yeah, right. OK, then. This, of course, is the home of Common Sense. I'm Mike Graham. We'll see you after this.
Difficult problem the government have is there's a gap in the fact that, you know, The budget massively put up taxes, but also massively put up spending. But if you look at the forecasts of GDP figures that were published last November, by the end of this Parliament, the public spending is dropping off, or not going up as quickly as you'd think it was. And then, you're completely right to say, Michael Lear is completely right as well, to say, look, all this stuff that was announced yesterday is going to take 20 years, perhaps, to kick in. There's going to be a big gap in the middle.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 9:53 is the time. It's nearly 10 o'clock. We're nearly at the end of another fabulous week of 5 4-hour broadcasts right here on Morning Glory, which we love doing, and we love welcoming all the new listeners and viewers every single week. We're absolutely flying, so thank you for listening and sending in all of your great voice notes as well, because we love them. Stu has got one on growth.
Brilliant as always. I run a manufacturing business. We make fast-moving consumer goods, and I've never known the outlook be as gloomy as it is at the moment. We've seen a sharp drop-off in orders for the UK since around the budget last year. We're now faced with the national insurance contribution hike, which we have to pass on to our customers. Now, that's difficult enough in the UK, but they all understand because they're all in the same boat. But we also export a considerable amount of our goods into Europe. How do I tell our European customers that they need to pay for this national insurance hike? It's ridiculous. Keep up the good work, Mike.
Stu, thank you very much indeed. It is totally ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, why on earth should they want to pay any more money than they do now? And why should you have to charge more money than you do now? And the reason is this Labour government, which has got no clue about business. It's got no clue about how to fix the economy. In fact, with every single day that passes, the economy gets worse and worse and worse. Unbelievable. The other thing that they need to fix is Prevent. Prevent is an organisation that doesn't prevent anything. I had a big row with Lord Carlisle, who was rather in favour of it the last time we spoke, even though he had a very different view back in September. We spoke earlier on the show today to Katie Amos, who's the daughter of Sir David Amos, of course, who was stabbed to death by an assailant who had been to Prevent but had been ruled not to be dangerous enough to do anything about. Basically, she said she has many concerns about the lack of action by both Labour and the Tories and Prevent.
It's just repeated failings time and time again. And until we do an inquiry into each individual case, we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of what's going wrong. So we're going to find ourselves in this situation time and time again. And the government can't pick and choose who they're going to help. But if they're going to help one set of people, they need to help everybody. Yeah. So I don't accept the fact that because she wasn't Home Secretary at the time, we won't get an inquiry. That's not how it works. People have launched inquiries into previous government's actions. Yeah. And that's
the Post Office inquiry for a start. The Post Office inquiry is about all sorts of different governments who are responsible for it. Yeah. So that is completely a red herring, isn't it, to hide behind?
Absolutely. And, I've been in tears because I just think the Conservatives wouldn't help me. I thought the Labour government would help me, but it doesn't seem like they are going to. Right. I tried to take it through the court system. I've tried to launch an independent police complaint, which has just been completely ignored. It's like nobody wants to find out what went wrong, and I'm just asking why. What is it that happened that we aren't allowed to know as a family?
Right. And why do you think they are so reticent to have that investigation and to find out what happened, or to tell you what was the problem?
I think it's going to embarrass them massively that it was such incompetence and it was a government scheme. And I think they just don't want to be embarrassed, but that's not good enough. Everybody wants to say that my dad was their friend. Yeah. But if you have a friend that was tragically killed like this, wouldn't you stand up for him and do what is right and fight for him? Because that is what he would do for them. Yeah. So somebody just needs to stop being scared and just blow this thing open and find out what it is that is being hidden from us and the public, because people aren't safe right now. People are infiltrating, getting away from the system. In my dad's case, they took the guy out for a cup of coffee. He said he wasn't a terrorist, and he went on his way.
Right.
He even said in court it was so easy to get away from the people that were questioning him because they just said what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
What kind of message does it send to other potential terrorists if your friend and colleague of 40 years that is a sitting MP is brutally killed and you won't even do an inquiry?
Katie Amos there speaking to me a little bit earlier on in the show. A very brave woman, and we wish her all the best with her inquiries, trying to get something out of any government about her own father, of course. Mike in Warwickshire, I'd love to talk to you, but I think we're kind of out of time, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry, but you might be able to talk to Russell Quirk, who's here. Very good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, call me. Why not? I mean, you know, it's your second fiddle.
Yeah, indeed.
I suppose. Well, no, you're not supposed to agree. So
I always agree with you, Russell. You're a very sensible man, and you're often right.
Well, it has been known occasionally. So yeah, I guess. Look, so what am I going to be talking about? Is your question, isn't it? So it's obviously the end of your show. You've done 4 hours, and you're absolutely knackered.
Not really. No. In fact, last night there was a moment where I said to Lauren, "If you want me to stay on at 10